I saw a shadow person walk through my kitchen, and at the time didn't take it too seriously. I was freaked out, but reasoned it away, and thought I was seeing things and kind of forgot about it. About a month later, my friend visiting also saw it, and described it to me exactly in the same place as my kitchen, same height, body shape. It really freaked us out. A few other house guests saw him over the course of my stay in that apartment, in which many other unexplainable things happened. The one thing that stands out, though, is the story with the keys. I lived in this apartment for 2 years while I finished my undergrad, and I often went home to see family. On one trip, I told my dear friend John he could feel free to use my house, stay there, or just watch TV to get away from his controlling family that he still lived with. I gave him my keys and asked him to be sure not to lose them, as I had already lost the spares. So he and 3 of our good friends go up there for the weekend to my house. The first day they get there, John asked the group to help him remember to get the keys and lock up after they were done having movie night. They all said they saw him put the keys in the center of the dining room table, and they commenced having fun. A few hours later they're heading out, and John goes to grab the keys, but they are not on the table anymore. He freaks out because he had been so sure to say to everyone, and everyone saw him put them there. Then it became a key hunting party, and everyone starts looking everywhere. Did they fall on the floor? Did they fall behind the couch? They looked everywhere. 2 hours later, John is in near tears, and everyone is freaked out. Now, none of these people except one, Sarah, knew my apartment had strange things going on. She later told me she could feel a strange energy in the house after the keys went missing, like a tingly feeling of anticipation. She didn't want to scare John, as she was already feeling guilty for maybe losing my keys, so she didn't mention any of this until I got back. So it's almost hour 3, and all 4 of them are gathered in the front room around the corner from the dining room, and talking about what to do. I think they were right about to call me. That's when the whole group hears a distinct clank in the other room, and they all jump a bit. John goes running around the corner, and the keys are just there, where he left them, in the middle of the table. Now, John doesn't believe in anything supernatural. He always made fun of me for being into witchcraft and ghosts, and Sarah told me he went all white, which was massively impressive for a very tanned Chinese guy, and ran out the door. Everyone else walked out after him, and quickly they locked the door. When I got home, the house was a bit disheveled, but everything was as it should have been. John, nearly in tears, described what happened. At first, I thought they were all joking, but all 4 of them had the same story, and they aren't very big jokesters. Sarah told me that she would not be coming to my house anymore, and I think this was like the 4th strange thing she'd seen at my house, and it was by far the most intense. I kind of just had to shrug, because I had to keep living there, and if I freak out, well, where would I go? It always seemed like the strange happenings in my apartment affected guests and others more than me. I'm also not scared by stuff like that, and in fact think it's interesting and cool, so maybe that's why they didn't mess with me a ton, but still a little. Either way, that apartment was a lot of my friends' first and only brush with the paranormal. While for me it was more like observing a science experiment. Sometimes I miss it, but I don't miss waking up to shadow people standing in my doorway at 3 in the morning, or having friends that go to sleep in my backyard in the middle of the night because they're too scared of my little 2-bedroom apartment. Good old apartment number 7. Usually, I get sleep paralysis during the day, in a nap, if I'm on my back. And usually it's one of 4 things. An invisible entity trying to choke me and drag me around the room, up to the ceiling especially. 2, an invisible entity trying to assault me. 3, just a general falling or flying sensation. And sometimes it seems like I'm going to go through a wall or the floor, and I've pulled an Ant-Man and went subatomic or some stuff. The fourth kind is where I see people all around, whether they be strangers or friends or my significant other. Like it'll just be me home alone and it'll happen. And I'll just hear the sound of my significant other come home, clear his throat, kick his shoes off and sit in his unbearably squeaky desk chair. Or it'll sound like strangers may be walking in and out, and that they're all around me, but I can't make out what they're actually saying. In any case, one day I'm in the bedroom napping, and sleep paralysis happens. This time it sounds like there's a bunch of people walking back and forth outside the bedroom window, but I can't make out anything of what's being said. I'm trying to move, trying to hear the voices better, trying to just snap the hell out of it, but I'm not having any luck. Then, one male voice comes in clear as a bell and just says, "Poop." That broke the spell and I woke up laughing my ass off at the singular word. 10 out of 10 sleep paralysis experience, would gladly do over again, just for all the other kinds. This happened around October, so not too long ago, and it's undoubtedly one of the most terrifying things that has ever happened in my life. To give you some background info, I live in a rather secluded home with my 21-year-old half-sister Cindy, since neither of us have parents. Anyway, we literally have 20 outdoor cats freely roaming the property. Except Jasper, Cindy's big Maine Coon tabby, who she spoils the heck out of, and probably loved more than most people. Honestly, I can't say I blamed her for that. Jasper loved to cuddle, was friendly to everyone, and he usually would greet us outside when I came home from school. As far as cats come, Jasper sure was one of a kind. This will be relevant for a little later. Due to a severe outbreak of COVID in my area, my school forced us to transfer to virtual learning until further notice, unlike a lot of other kids. I don't mind online learning. Because of this, my connection is so bad I can't even access Google Meets. I get out of participating in the live stream and simply just do my homework. So anyway, when Cindy found out we were switching to online, she immediately told me that she wanted me to go to work with her and I could do my schoolwork there. When I ask her why she wanted me to go with her, she proceeds to tell me that she doesn't feel safe with me being here home alone all day. This baffled me, because during the summer, I was left home alone the entire freaking day while she was at work, and it was never a problem. I was a bit suspicious, but decided it was best to not pitch up an argument. Maybe she was just lonely, and didn't want to admit it. So that was that. My sister works 3 different jobs, depending on the shifts she picks up, and the last job of the day is either the dealership or the local Japanese restaurant, so I had to sit in a booth or a chair somewhere in the corner doing my homework while my sister went on her own doing her little tasks. It sucked, yes, and I was still inwardly fuming at the fact why I couldn't have just done all this at home, and I eventually found that out. I was sitting in a booth with my MacBook finishing up an assignment that I had been procrastinating on when a guy walked through the front entrance. He, at first, appeared to be a pretty normal dude, so I initially didn't pay much mind to him. But when he sat down at the bar and kept trying to talk to my sister, who blatantly showed little interest in speaking to him, was when I couldn't tear my attention away. As I mentioned prior, my sister is 21, and I couldn't really tell because half of his face was obscured by a mask. But this dude had to be at least in his 30s, so it's no surprise she wasn't interested. But as this continued to escalate, I literally had to plug my nose in order to suppress my laughter. Could this guy seriously not take a hint? I felt a twinge of sympathy for my sister, though it's never fun dealing with some douchebag who's relentless. Finally, when Cindy's shift ended, she seemed happier than ever to get the hell out of there. Being the younger sister, of course, I teased her about it and said something along the lines of, "So, who's the guy you were talking to?" And she literally cringed as though she was caused physical pain. Cindy went on to tell me that the guy had been coming to visit her at work for some time. He had introduced himself as Chandler and claimed that he lived relatively close to us. My sister was dubious about that though, because the only person that lives near us is our neighbor Doris, a woman in her 60s. After that, we headed back home, but what she said had only brought more questions to the forefront. Why did Cindy want me to go to work with her? Was she scared of the guy coming to our house and doing something to me while she was away? The thoughts sent chills skittering down my spine. As we were driving back to the house, I ventured to ask Cindy what exactly this guy knows about her, and she said the only information she gave out was her first name and how old she was, and that she had a younger sister and stuff about the cats, but had never given him so much as a hint as where we lived. And I have to admit, it made me feel quite queasy. But perhaps could have just been a neighbor we'd never met. I haven't even lived with my sister for a year at that point, and she hasn't even lived in the area for that long either, so I just dropped the subject. However, as the days went on, and I had to spend my school days at my sister's work, this dude occasionally showed up to hit on her. And the creepy thing was that this dude knew every place she worked, which I was absolutely disturbed by, unless, which I doubt, Cindy had told her exact schedule and all the places she worked. I suggested to Cindy that maybe she should call the cops, but I couldn't imagine what help they could do, considering that the creeper hadn't broken any laws yet. He was just being a creep. Cindy concluded the same thing, and said that maybe if she continues not showing any interest, he'd finally get the hint and leave her alone. I then asked her the reason she wanted me coming to work, and she admitted that it was because of this guy. I felt like a jerk for being so annoyed about it in the past. If I was scared on her behalf, I couldn't imagine how uncomfortable she must have felt. Unfortunately, the guy never seemed to get the damn hint, and continued to pull stuff on Cindy. On an unbusy day at the Japanese restaurant, the infamous dude dragged his stump ass into the building and jumped into his casual business of pestering my sister. And about the 1300th time of politely turning him down, Cindy finally snapped and made a huge scene of going absolutely crazy on the guy, shouting at him that she was not interested and to just leave her alone and to never bother her again. Humiliated, the dude slipped out of the restaurant, leaving my sister seething in his wake. And if I'm being honest, I've never seen my sister go off like that on anyone, not even my misbehaving ass. Cindy began to full out slobber into her co-worker's shoulder after that, and everyone there was wondering what the hell happened. I couldn't blame them. I just really hoped the dude was done with this creepy shenanigan stuff. But boy was I wrong. After everything went down, he stopped coming to my sister's work and seemed to quit bothering her altogether. She thought her outburst was what finally did the trick, and we wouldn't have to deal with the freak anymore, but she still wanted me coming to work just to be safe. And, if I'm going to be truthful, I was actually okay with that. Strangely, as the creepless week progressed, something was going on with Jasper. He was throwing up and having some sort of diarrhea, and just seemed overall too exhausted to move. Cindy, of course, was extremely worried and stated that the poor cat must have gotten into poison or ate something weird outside. She scheduled an appointment to take Jasper to the vet, but unfortunately, Jasper had passed away before then. And to say the least, Cindy was absolutely heartbroken. She really loved that cat, and losing an important pet can sometimes hurt as much as losing another person. I went through the same situation in my former home with an animal I was close to. After several dismissal hours of my sister wailing like a toddler and clutching her cat to her chest, she told me that we were going to bury Jasper out back. Cindy had kind of a pet cemetery at the edge of our yard, which was visible from the window. I helped her bury Jasper and made a little headstone to place on his grave, and after that, I heaved up an attempt to comfort her by making some tea and putting on the office, but she still couldn't stop crying. Later that night, at around 1 a.m., I was in the middle of FaceTiming my friend when this faint digging sound emitted outside my window. I shut up instantaneously and began listening, and made sure what I was hearing was real, and it was. Someone was outside at 1 in the morning digging a hole in our yard. Keep in mind, this is private property." "What the hell?" I muttered. She kept asking what was going on, and I responded saying that I'd be right back and hung up. With my stomach in knots, I crawled across my bed over to my window. Could it have been Cindy? I hesitantly peeked through the shades and my heart leapt into my throat with what I saw. Provided by the moonlight, I was able to scope out a silhouetted figure in the middle of the pet cemetery, digging in what appeared to be Jasper's grave. What the hell? This definitely was not Cindy. I couldn't make out any of their features, but the telltale oversized trench coat that they were wearing appeared to be giving me everything I needed to know. The bile in my stomach curdled with nausea. It couldn't have been the creep. What the hell was he doing in our pet cemetery at this time of night? What was going on? I couldn't unglue my eyes from the macabre scene, watching as the creep finally tossed aside the shovel and reached into the hole, pulling out Jasper's giant form. I absolutely hate to relive this moment, but he began to do unspeakable things to the cat corpse, things that no teenager or anyone should ever have to witness. My mouth dropped open in horror. Distraught, I finally tore my gaze away and released the scream locked in my chest and began to cry, darting to Cindy's room at wind speed. I practically ripped the door off its hinges, shrieking and sobbing at my sister to get up and get the hell out of there, and that there was someone doing stuff to our dead cat. I had to re-explain the situation at least 3 times before Cindy could understand what I was screaming about. When she did, she didn't even bother looking outside and just dialed 911. The cops took so long to arrive, and the creep had probably the sense to flee, due to the cacophony of sound going on inside. When they searched the property, I remember cracking some joke like, "I wonder what Stephen King would think of this version of Pet Sematary," which Cindy did not find amusing. Unsurprisingly, the guy was nowhere to be found, and neither was Jasper's corpse, so that sick guy actually took the cat with him and would continue to do God knows what to it, unless the freak had been watching us bury him. I didn't know how he knew the precise spot to dig. Cindy was so upset that she started crying, and I can't say I was in much of a better condition. The cops eventually left, and there wasn't anything left to do besides fall back into an uneasy sleep. I was so disturbed that night that I ended up staying in my sister's room, and maybe got 2 hours of sleep at most, since the sickening image had been seared into my brain. The next day, however, I heard Cindy shriek from the other room. I ran out as fast as I could, demanding to know what happened and if everything was alright, and she handed me a splotchy slip of paper, and said she found it taped to the front door, and it read something along the lines of, "I couldn't have you, so I had to have what was closest to you. C." So because Cindy rejected this creep, he seriously snaked onto our property while we were away, poisoned her cat, an innocent, unsuspecting animal, and ultimately ended up stealing the poor thing's corpse to do things to. Now, I've met some messed up people in my life, but this seriously tops the list. After she read it over again, Cindy promptly ripped up the paper and tossed it into our fireplace in disgust. I snapped at her, saying we should have turned it in as evidence, but she shook her head. Thankfully, we haven't seen or heard from him since then, and I really hope it stays that way. Eventually, my sister allowed me to start staying home alone again if I promised to keep all the doors locked and call her immediately if anything else weird went on. To the creep, you're a sicko, and I hope one day you come to your senses and get the help you so very desperately need. I don't know what you planned on doing with Jasper, but I hope you never bother my sister or any of her cats again. I live in the valley of Sacramento, California, a few miles from the American River. This particular river is only a short walk away from a vintage part of my town, where there is absolutely nothing but chickens and a family-owned business. My first job was a family-owned coffee shop when I was 16 in this little town. To give you some backstory, now a lot of the homeless folk often flocked to the rivers and would often wander into my shop. I dealt with the odd bodies on and off almost every day without a care. However, there was one weirdo I remember vividly enough that it still makes me sit and wonder. When I was new to the shop, it took some time to get to know the regulars and remember their names. I had a lot of faces to memorize. One face in particular, for some reason, sat in my mind far above the others. A stout, bald man with a wide nose and thinly timmed glasses. He wasn't quite old, but he wasn't the youngest man I'd met. He would stand outside of my store for about 10 minutes every day before coming in to stand in the back of the cafe and watch me and my other co-workers clean and make coffee. Sometimes he wouldn't order anything, but when he did, he would always get a small black coffee and a small serving of potato salad. He would always ask for napkins and would always ask for a pen. After ordering, he would proceed to write things down on one of the napkins, leave his empty coffee cup on a table, and take his food out the door, where he would stand and watch us pick up his trash. I noticed over time that he seemed to look irritated when I wasn't the one to do it. Every time he did this, he would leave small notes in poor, rough handwriting, and would then throw away his salad outside. His notes were more person. At first I thought of it as nothing more than a sweet thank you. I often write small notes to serve as on receipts from time to time, things like wonderful day and thank you. But these slowly morphed. Beautiful day, take a break, I'm outside. You look lovely today, love your hair. My co-workers would make a gag out of the notes if they weren't thrown away before reading one. Once I assumed he figured out that the other girls were the ones grabbing them. He began to leave them on one end of the counter where my espresso machine was. You make me happy, Kian, one of them read. I still don't know how he learned my name or who asked, but I presume one of my co-workers on a day I was off. I began to get increasingly uncomfortable whenever he would stand outside and watch me work, or when he would order from my till. I could only smile and thank him as I got his coffee and salad, in my customer service voice. The next part is where it gets interesting. One week towards the end of the summer, he worked his routine of window shopping before ordering, asking for napkins and a pen, and going about his letter. However, he did not ask for a pen nor napkins, but proceeded to only ask for the coffee. He left to the restroom. I forgot how long he was in there, since I myself took my lunch break as soon as the order was done. When I returned, I was told that someone had left their cup in the restroom, and it had been emptied and left on top of the toilet. It was filled with semen. I don't know if it was him, but the timing was too close to not assume. I didn't see him for a while, because I had traded my early starts for closing shifts. The last time I saw him, he came in late. I presume he either found out by stalking or asking my co-workers why I was no longer a morning maid. He asked me kindly for a cup of coffee and potato salad, a pen and a napkin. I obliged, but I was hardly enthusiastic. The routine went normally. He drank his coffee, sat and wrote, left it on the counter without looking up, and walked out into the night. He didn't stop to watch. He didn't throw away his salad. You're lovely every time. Thank you for the smiles. Leave the glitter to the blondes. I don't know what this means. You're a young flower amongst the sunset. Billy. After that, I never saw him come into the store or lurk outside the window. I don't often lend out pens as much as I used to. So creepy poetry napkin guy, let's not meet.
This story happened to my husband and I in the summer of 2015. We were house sitting for these rich people in between our move to the mainland, as we're from Hawaii, and some crazy stuff started to happen just a few days in. The first weird thing that happened was when we got there. We couldn't figure out how to get the motion sensor light in the entry garage hallway to turn off. We thought nothing of it. A few days later, I was watching TV, and you can see the front door from the living room, and I saw a shadow man walking by the front door. I wasn't particularly freaked out, because unfortunately shadow people are frequent visitors of mine.
I think it must be a Hawaii thing, because everyone here has seen them. I think it must have been that same evening that I hadn't seen my husband for several minutes, so I called out to him and saw the front motion detecting light flip on again. Right at that moment, I walked out, then heard him go, "What?" from the backyard, not the front yard. I quickly walked to the backyard through the house and started back towards the front yard. Then I saw an orb zoom out of the house and into the yard. A side note, I've watched orbs on the paranormal shows on Discovery Channel, but never thought they were real until I actually saw one. Pretty creepy, but fast forward a few days, a different motion detecting light started going crazy one night, flipping on and off for varying intervals. At this point, my husband, who you may call the rational one, is totally freaked out. I, however, felt extremely curious and wanted to investigate, which is so weird for me because I'm a serious scaredy cat. I even made my husband walk me to the bathroom in the middle of the night because I was too afraid to go by myself, but I felt compelled to go towards the garage/upstairs area. There's an apartment above the garage, and figure out what was going on. We got a flashlight and shined it into the garage and apartment window, and we couldn't help feeling this very, very weird dread and fear emanating from the garage. Even though I was curious, I also felt it in the pit of my stomach, like some overwhelming depression and evil. We called it quits, locked the doors, and went to bed. There were several other encounters while we were staying there. One evening, I heard someone say, "Ding dong," kind of like someone would when they got to a friend's house to inform them of their presence. After which the dogs, we were also dog sitting, went nuts barking at the front door, although there was no one there. One night when we were walking into the bedroom, something brushed up against my arm, and when I turned to look, I saw a person walking the other way down the hallway, turning a corner. Myself and one of the dogs saw an orb fly out of a room we were in. The dog definitely saw it too, and he looked freaked out. One morning while showering, I dropped my razor on the ground, and then I bent down to pick it up. It was back on the countertop across the bathroom. Another morning, my husband dropped his toothbrush, then he couldn't find it for an hour, and it reappeared back on the countertop. I've had a lot of ghostly paranormal encounters in my life, but this last summer just puts it over the top. At this point, I was in tears asking my husband why I'm so perceptive and why they kept happening to me. I've been haunted in the past by negative spirits, and I know I probably sound like a cuckoo nutjob just by saying that, but I'm your average grad student, so I get really fearful whenever paranormal activity starts acting up.
I am a skeptic in general, and don't buy into the paranormal stuff. But something happened to me in college that I can't quite explain, to the point that I remind myself a few times every year that it actually happened. I was sleeping over at my girlfriend's house, and for a few nights I had been having a very similar nightmare. The fact I was having nightmares at all was odd in itself. I rarely remembered my dreams at that point in my life, but suddenly I was having them all the time. The dreams themselves were terrifying. I don't remember all the details, but I clearly remember the source of my fear. It was very tall and spindly, with thin arms and legs and the head of a dog. It kind of looked like an Egyptian Anubis. I remember that it would sort of dance towards me in my dream with its arms waving wildly above its head, almost like it had one of those air-driven advertisements that they put in front of car lots to get your attention as you drive by. Sounds dumb when I type it out, but it was scary enough that it still fills me with a sense of dread. And we're talking 15 years later here. All of this is explainable. Until one night, I was having the dream again and woke up right around the time I usually did. Only this time I was awoke, not just with residual terror, but also with an overwhelming sense that something was very wrong and that I was in imminent danger. I looked over at my girlfriend, just in time to see her eyes snap open. We look at each other and just know to get out. We flip on the lights, and here's where I begin to double doubt myself and have to constantly remind myself that yes, it did happen, and froze. All around the room are my girlfriend's hats. There's one on the lamp, a few on the floor, one on the exercise bike, one on the desk, and when we went to sleep, they were all in a box. We stood there a moment in shock. All the while inside my head, I just get the feeling that we need to get out, but we don't say a word. We just looked at each other, both white as a sheet. We turned and got the hell out of her apartment, not even pausing to putting shoes on, and we didn't sleep over there again. I never had that dream again, and to this day I have no idea what the hell to think about it, but I don't want to forget it either.
This incident happened when I was 14. I'm now 23. My dad at the time, a whitewater raft guide, would often be out of town during peak seasons, leaving me, my older sister of 7 years, and my stepmother at home nestled in front of the Cherokee National Forest in East Tennessee. It was later in the evening of a Friday night that me and my sister decided we wanted Subway before they closed, so we asked our stepmom and she said, sure. So my sister and I got into the car and went to Subway, which was only a few miles. As we pulled out from the stop sign at an intersection, I noticed a car get behind us. Not unusual, just that we lived in a sleepy small town, so maybe we knew them. We didn't think about it. We arrive at Subway, which is in a shabby shopping center where an old white grocery store that was right beside of the restaurant. It's dark at this point, and the car pulls into the dark, unlit parking lot where a lot of local high schoolers hang out. I quickly thought it was just another teen hanging out, but I was wrong. We finish our order and leave with our food in our hands when I notice the car's headlights flick as we're opening our car doors. I then mention it to my sister and she shrugged it off, so we drove away from Subway to the exit of the parking lot, and the unknown driver of this white Ford Probe floored it across the parking lot, running over to the curb to keep behind us. This definitely scared my older sister. There's multiple ways to get to our house, so we took the more intricate and confusing way to someone who doesn't know where they're going. We were scared and just wanted to get home. The vehicle kept up with us until a few turns before our neighborhood. As I mentioned before, we lived on the top of a hill, and the forest was behind us, but in front of us were 3 streets, forming a valley-like structure. We get closer to our house, and since we lost the follower, we figured we were being paranoid. We get to our driveway and walk inside and kind of jokingly tell our story to our stepmom. And in the midst of it, we see headlights from a car in front of the house. My sister looks out the window. It's the white Probe. We're scared at this point, because this person either was very aware of where we lived, or was a neighbor that we weren't aware of. They sit outside the house for what seems like a really long time, and before my stepmom gets her phone to call my father to ask if he would have any idea who this was, they drive off, which is odd. We sit and eat our food uncomfortably but try to shake it off. And we see the old vehicle outside again 4 more times. Later, when my father called, he wasn't sure who it was, but assured us we were okay and that we had firearms in the house. We lived in a safe neighborhood, and that's all he could say through the phone in Florida. Maybe it was someone who was lost, or thought they knew my sister. We didn't know. My stepmom had to work the next day. Since it was the weekend, my sister and I slept in late and awoke at around 11 AM and decided to play some video games. Shortly after we started playing, there was a knock at the front door. Nobody should have been knocking, so we didn't answer, and it kept going and getting harder. Now from our living room you could see into the kitchen. My dad, being a nature lover, had built a ceiling-to-floor window in the kitchen to sip coffee and watch nature. This is important. The knocking subsides and my sister is trying to find her Motorola flip phone to call our stepmom and the police. As she's doing that, we both see this man peering inside our large kitchen window, and as we make eye contact, he turns and walks up the hill into the national forest. The police arrive several minutes later, and so does our stepmom, who was also besides herself. The police ask if we knew who this could have possibly been, and why whoever this was would have left a note on our door. A note on our door, I thought? Till we read writing, the poorly written note that was written on a torn corner of a piece of sticky paper pad that read, "I wasn't planning on hurting anyone." We told the officers what happened, and that he went up to the hill into the forest, so they did a quick scan and said they didn't see anyone, and that we really just need to keep everything locked up for a while, be vigilant, and if we experience this again to give them a ring. We shortly moved thereafter. This event and for other reasons, and to the man driving the white Ford Probe, let's not meet.
A little backstory in order for all of this to make a bit more sense. I used to live in New York City in a tiny apartment full of 6 other people and me, so 7 in total. We dubbed ourselves the team. I was the youngest at 19 and was treated like all little sisters, as everyone else was 26 to 35. I'm also pretty tiny, standing at 5'2", and not even 115 pounds soaking wet. This particular instance involved my giant 6'5" weightlifter roommate from Africa that I called Moo. During the summer, I worked at a little hole-in-the-wall coffee shop on the Upper East Side. Contrary to popular belief, the highest crime rate was the Upper East Side. I would close on a few nights out the week with another worker that absolutely hated my guts called Fatima. I only agreed to close on the night she worked the late shift because I got to bring home the bagels that wouldn't sell and would give these out, otherwise they'd be thrown away. On my walk home, which was about a 30-minute walk, I would give a bag of bagels to a nice homeless man. I called him Bagel Guy, and he called me Coffee Girl. And now is where the story begins. Earlier in the day that I closed with my coworker Fatima, a man had come in and ordered coffee, which isn't unusual in itself because I worked in a coffee shop. What made him stand out was that I had never seen him before, and neither had my coworkers. The coffee shop was one of those places with regulars that would have their orders being made the second they stepped into the door, and everyone knew them by name or at least recognized them. I brushed it off as maybe he was exploring or had recently moved into the area. But as the line steadily shrunk, I was noticing that he was staring bullets at me. At first, I wasn't too worried. After all, I lived in New York City, and there was an overtly fair amount of awkward and unusual characters. Only this guy was blatantly staring bullets at me, to the point where I could feel his eyes on me when I turned around to grab people's orders. When it was his turn to order, I mentioned that I hadn't seen him in the shop before, and he replied that he had stopped in because he saw me at the window. Okay. Again, it's New York City. People do weird stuff. He ordered, he paid, but he kept hanging around the counter trying to get my attention and to speak to me. I politely told him that I was busy and that he'd need to grab a seat or clear out because I needed to work. Mind you, this place was literally like a closet. The only people that would ever sit at the 2.5 tables we had were the guy that cleaned and ran our pickups, or one of the 3 people that had been coming to the shop since the dawn of time itself. This strange guy hung around nearly all day, sometimes outside or at the table when a seat was available, but he was never out of sight for more than 30 to 45 minutes. I was starting to get weirded out at this point that I voluntarily talked to Fatima, even though she despised me. So much so to the point she'd yell at me in front of customers and complain loudly to the managers about me. I told her the weird guy had been bugging me all day, and didn't listen when I told him that I couldn't just loiter. Fatima didn't care. When closing time came around, we would usually be done around 11:30 to midnight. I was tasked with going to grab our little sign and bench that we had outside. So I go out, and guess who's there? That's right, the weirdo. I tell him that we are closing, and that I needed to bring the bench inside. He gets off the bench and walks off. I watch him turn the corner at the end of the street, but I'm still weirded out. I mention it to Fatima and ask her if she'd stay with me because I wanted my roommate Moo to come and get me.
But she doesn't care. I grab my bags of leftover bagels, and she locks up and gets out of there towards one of the subway stations uptown. My apartment was downtown, so I couldn't have walked with her anyway. As I'm walking, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being followed, and decided to turn quickly and without warning to see if I am. Turns out I was. Every time I'd turn around, this guy would quickly try to hide in a doorway like the stereotypical creeper in a movie, doubling back, switching avenues, and trying to lose him by hiding in groups of people didn't help. I know many people are gonna think, why didn't I call someone? You see, my hands were full, and I was trying not to triple panic. Remember Bagel Guy? This is where he makes an appearance. I'd always be bringing him bagels and we'd have a chat. I finally reach where Bagel Guy usually is and say hi and hand him his share of the bagels. I tell him that I'm being followed and tell him that he's hiding badly in a doorway. Bagel Guy sees the creep and tells me to stay where I am and to call someone. Moo was the only person I could reach. I had acted like my phone rang and was kind of talking in shorthand to him about the creep and that I was with Bagel Guy. Moo was still a ways downtown, but said that he was hurrying, and I asked Bagel Guy if he'd walk with me to meet my roommate because I was scared out of my mind, and he agreed and said it was no problem. We start our walk downtown towards my roommate, and the whole time the creeper is still following. He's even doing the whole horribly fail at trying to hide shtick, but he's getting closer and closer every time we turn to look. But there's still no sign of Moo and I want to cry. Finally, we see a beast of a man just barreling towards us and I immediately recognize it as Moo. I guess he had seen the guy following me and now Bagel Guy, because Moo doesn't stop as he reaches us, he just kept on running. Bagel Guy and I decide to jog towards where Moo was heading, and I was glad I did. When Moo reached the creep, he shoved past him against the wall where he was hiding and confronted him about following his little sister. I guess I should note that I looked nothing like Moo. The creepy guy is now the one scared out of his mind. He has this 6'5" ripped guy that's nearly breathing fire at him. Moo threatened the guy that if he catches him following us again after this, or following me, or coming to the coffee shop, that the creep is going to regret it severely. I was a little taken aback. Moo is a giant teddy bear, but he's not someone you want to be on the bad side of. After Moo was done scaring the guy, he thanked Bagel Guy many times for watching out for me and hoped he enjoyed his bagels. Then Moo and I got home. Unfortunately, I was never bothered by that creep again. When I was 16, my friends and I had an apartment in the building his parents owned. It was an old building in Chicago that had tunnels that Al Capone and Company had built that his dad blocked off. We used the roof as a place to go to smoke cigarettes. You had to get through the attic to get there though. There were no lights, so the only lights we had were from our terrible brick and flip phones. One day, my friend Manny and I were going up to smoke, and I told Manny I needed to go to the toilet. So, I did that in the apartment. When I was done, I went up and felt like there was someone there. It was pretty common for us to mess with each other, so I said, "Manny, I know it's you, quit messing around." And I followed this shadow figure thinking it was him. I yelled, "Stop playing, I know it's you," as I followed. Then I heard from downstairs Manny say, "What?" I was terrified. I had just followed him to a corner. I ran back downstairs and asked if he was there. He was talking to his girlfriend at the time, and I told him I didn't want to go upstairs. I know what I saw. People always tried to say, "Maybe the shadow was your own." That is not possible, because I owned at the time a Motorola flip phone, and I was only holding that in front of me. I saw a shadow person, and I know others have too. I lived in an apartment complex for 7 years, middle to high school,
and experienced a lot of weird stuff with many witnesses. But the most unnerving was this. I was laying in bed just getting comfortable. I was rolled onto my side facing the wall, when I felt someone sit on the bed behind me. I thought perhaps my mum had come in, and I turned to look, but there was no one. I could still feel the dip in my bed. The door was closed, the light was off. I was totally alone. I was freaked out so much that I rolled back over and stared at the wall, trying to get the courage to reach over and turn the lamp on. Well, suddenly I feel whatever was sitting there lay down and put an arm around me. I felt the pressure of an arm on my side. I felt the dip of weight behind me. I was too scared to move at that point since I didn't want to turn around and see what was there. Eventually I fell asleep, and nothing strange happened the next morning.
I moved a lot growing up. By the time freshman year of high school came around, I had moved 7 or so times and was about a year and a half into my most recent move. I had found a pretty close group of friends in middle school and we all went to high school together. I met him through one of those close friends. They were in a band together, and even though he was almost 4 years older than us, we welcomed him into our group. Sam was easily twice my size, tall and heavy-set, and originally kind of intimidating, although I was never afraid of large men before him. Lesson learned. I kind of had a bad home life, and I spent as much time as I could at school, sometimes hanging around the school campus until 6 or 7 at night with this friend group. 3 of us lived in the same direction and we would walk the half-hour trip together until our paths split. One slightly colder evening, Sam offered to walk me home since the others had already left. I just thought he was being a gentleman. He mentioned something from a previous move where he lived in California, where he didn't walk a friend home and something horrible happened. He left it at that, and I let him walk me home. We got a lot closer after that, and bonded over both living in California and exchanged numbers. He would message me late into the night about his depression and self-harm, and I just wanted to help. A few months later, he tried asking me out. This was a big romantic gesture. He learned a Disney song on the ukulele and sang it to me in the cafeteria, but I was already dating someone, and when I turned him down he got angry, and freaky, and quiet, twitchy kind of angry. So I felt bad. I started seeing him everywhere. We were still friends, we still hung out in our groups, but I would pass him on the streets, walking somewhere, and a few minutes later, I'd see that he had changed direction and start following me. He would walk me to classes by following me and passing periods at distance. I started to minimize the group time we spent together, and he would follow me more and more. I had friends meet me at each class and walk me to my next one because I was starting to feel unsafe, and he knew where I lived. Then he started to talk, not to me, but to a mutual friend about the one girl in California who he tried to walk home. At first, she just shared my name, some crazy coincidence. Then, she had the same brown curly hair and blue eyes. And every time he rambled about her, she became more and more like me. And then, he said what happened. Over literal weeks, this fantasy evolved. They were walking home, and they were jumped by some guy with a knife. It was a robbery gone wrong on her birthday, January 24th, which happened to be mine as well. She died horribly, and he couldn't react in time. She bled out in his arms. Sarah, who has brown, curly hair with blue eyes, shares my name, my birthday, and sounds just like me, bled out in his arms. Each retelling added more and more detail, and this guy, with his sick fantasy about my death, would follow me around and knew where I lived. My boyfriend was abusive, mentally and physically, but I stayed as close to him as I could whenever I could, because if the worst happened, I knew for sure he could throw a punch. I never felt safe at school or in a little town, especially when walking home from school in the dark. One day at school, he had a breakdown, freaked out, and ran out of the school in a panic. I was sent after him and found him curled up on the floor. I got closer. I knew about his anxiety and depression, and my safety aside, I wanted to make sure he was okay. It was then that he told me this horrifying story that I had been hearing from mutual friends with added detail. We had been walking home from a concert in California. We passed a dark alley, and a homeless man came out with a rusty knife and asked for anything valuable. I fumbled for my phone but didn't have anything else on me, and he thought I was calling the cops. He stabbed me once, twice, again and again, and Sam stood there horrified. He saw red and grabbed a broken glass bottle near my body and attacked the homeless man and killed him with his own knife. He told me he killed someone. My stalker killed someone. It didn't matter how messed up he was anymore. I didn't care if it was a fantasy or real. I didn't care how it would affect his mental health anymore. I wanted to go to the police. I was scared for my life. My friends convinced me to go to the school counselor first. That morning we went and told them everything. The stalking, the stories, how he admitted to murder. And that was the reason they moved from California. How I was afraid for my life and wanted to call the police. The counselor didn't take us seriously. She went to the principal, and the principal, not a mental health expert, called Sam in to talk about the accusation. The principal then informed me that he did not think that Sam had any kind of mental illness or that I was in any danger, and that was that. I lost faith in adults, gave up on going to the police, and stayed with my friends, walking me in between classes, hiding behind my abusive boyfriend. I looked behind me every step of my walk home that year. The counselors ended up gaslighting us to the point where this all feels like a fever dream now, and I think I would have made it up were it not for my journal entries recording the events of my growing panic and the similar stories from my friend group. And just to clarify, I don't think anyone died in California. I think he's a pathological liar, and he was so deep in a fantasy that he had convinced himself it was real. No, I wasn't physically hurt, but it was emotional scarring, and the threat he posed was 100% real to me. So to Sam, let's not meet again. A friend of mine was telling me some stories about a Starbucks location she worked at, and this one really bummed me out. There are usually homeless people in that area, and most are relatively harmless. She and her co-workers noticed a grisly-looking man hovering around, and soon saw that he had a hunting knife in his belt, but that's legal in my state. I believe this is what got the cops called, but at some point during the encounter he borrowed an employee's phone and went to the bathroom. He then returned the phone and leaves. The employee checks the bathroom expecting to find needles or something, but also expecting to find drugs stashed somewhere, which happens apparently. Checking under the sink and inside a PVC pipe, she finds an SD card, plugs it in, and it is completely full of porn. I'm told they noped out of there immediately and called the police, so the details aren't known. I shared it here, but can't stop imagining the terrible underground network of people using dead drops to trade what has to be horrifying and almost certainly inappropriate sexual material, i.e. underage, in broad daylight. This happened around 1995. I'm pretty confident I saw a shadow person. At the time, my late wife and I were living in a double-wide mobile home that we had purchased, new, that was sitting on a spot that had never had any house of any kind, and is at least 1,000 feet from where any house is or has ever been to the best of my knowledge. In light of this, you would not think that our house would be a likely location for a haunting. However, my wife and I have on occasion seen several rather strange occurrences there, the most, starting of which, I will relate here. This event took place one night after my wife and I had retired for the evening. Normally at night, my wife and I would leave on a light all night in the bathroom furthest from our bedroom, because there are usually children in the house. That bathroom is just outside the children's bedrooms and would provide them with a nightlight. However, on that night, all the children were staying elsewhere, and there was no one in the house except my wife and I. As was usual though, we had left the light on in the bathroom out of habit, and it cast a glow through our open bedroom door, weakly lighting the room. Some time had passed after we had laid down, and I was unable to sleep. I assumed, though, that my wife was asleep, because her breathing had become regular, and reached a point at which it sounded like she was asleep. While laying there, unable to sleep, I began to become aware of a presence that I could not explain, other than to say I knew we were not alone. I was laying there, trying to convince myself that it was only my imagination, when suddenly and silently, a figure moved in through our bedroom door and proceeded parallel to our bed in a smooth, gliding motion. Then, rounding the corner of our bed, and took up a fixed position at the foot of it. Strangely, I seemed to be acutely aware that this entity was conscious of us and was intently watching us while I was laying there watching it. The entity can best be described as something that had the appearance of black smoke or a shadow. However, it was more material than either of these, but less material than a real person. The strangest thing about this whole situation was my complete lack of fear. Although I was acutely aware that some being had entered our room, and there was no doubt in my mind that it was absolutely not of this earth, at least not as we perceived it, it did not seem to arouse any fear response in me. I would say it aroused a feeling that would fit somewhere between creepy and curiosity, especially considering the fact that I was sure it was as aware of me as I was of it. After some time, I had almost convinced myself that I was imagining it, due to my drowsy condition and the dim light. Suddenly I realized that my wife was no longer breathing like she was asleep. Her breathing had become almost silent. Speaking in a calm voice, I said, "Honey, you awake?" She replied, "Yes." So I added, "Do you, see anything?" I was expecting her reply to be something along the lines of, "What do you mean?" But instead, and much to my surprise, she said, "You mean that thing standing at the foot of the bed?" When she said this, I did finally become somewhat nervous, and we both then began to pray. We lay there for about 10 minutes, softly saying prayers, and then it was gone. But it didn't just disappear. Over a period of about 20 seconds, it became less solid, like smoke clearing, and our perception of its presence became weaker and weaker until it just wasn't there anymore, almost as if it never had been. Nothing like this has ever happened since, and the only evidence that it did happen at all are my memories of it. I used to get sleep paralysis a lot. One night I had a lucid dream. It started out that I was at work and I had super strength. I've had dreams like this before, and usually no one cared that I had superpowers. But this time everyone was admiring me like I was a real hero. I got hurt on the job and had to go see the boss. At first I was talking to the boss and things seemed normal, general questions about the injury and stuff. Then he asked me, "What do you think about the powers I've given you?" And his face looked off somehow, just wrong. At this point I realized I was dreaming, but I couldn't get out of it, or rather I didn't wake up. It just kept going while he started offering me more power if I wanted it. I didn't know how to explain it, but I didn't feel like this was coming from my subconscious. It felt external and sinister, feeling like my soul was in jeopardy,
I grabbed him and threw him through this door that appeared. It was a door to the void. I felt like I'd passed a test, and before I could think too much, the secretary at our work came and stood in the doorway. She started praising me for turning down temptation for power, but she just kept getting more and more seductive. Just like before, I felt this was sinister, and out of nowhere I threw her at the door too. In that moment I snapped awake, breathing heavily, and actually feeling proud of some sort of accomplishment. I felt like I'd passed 2 tests of temptation, and again feeling proud of it, I was about to tell my girlfriend who was laying beside me. In that moment, I suddenly became paralyzed, just like sleep paralysis, except I was awake when it hit me. My eyes were open, and I was in the same world, but outside I could hear terrible things like screaming as people were being attacked and killed. I could visualize basically our world, but everything about it was violent and terrifying. Meanwhile, while paralyzed, I could feel something horrible flying towards my window to take me away. By this point I was actually crying so hard my girlfriend woke up and started shaking me to snap out of it. As soon as I got out of it, I held her crying and told her what happened. The whole experience made me feel like I'd been challenged with the temptation of power, then lust, and those who had failed, I'd forgotten about the last tool of the devil, so to speak, fear. This all happened the better part of 20 years ago now, and I remember it as clearly as ever. It's worth noting that I have never been a very religious person, and this was the first time I'd ever entertained the idea of being tempted by the devil or whatever, and was one of the most terrifying experiences I've ever been through. On a side note, a year later Constantine came out in theaters, and it made me raise an eyebrow at the concept of hell being another dimension similar to Earth. The hell in Constantine was much different than the one I saw in my paralysis, but again, it was the concept that caught my attention in a way that was perhaps more meaningful than most.
I turned 21 this recent October. As part of my celebration, I took some friends to this bar that sits on top of a 30-story hotel. This bar was in the city about 30 minutes out from the small rural town that I live in, but because of COVID regulations, one party at the time was allowed in the elevator. One party at a time was allowed in the elevator, and each party was allowed in the bar as another party left, so we were waiting for a while. They had a designated area for the line that had social distancing stickers placed on the ground and rope dividers that guided the line in a snake pattern. My friends and I were chilling, most of us just on our phones trying to pass the time, and I look up from my phone to engage my surroundings when I see a man standing across the lift from us, his phone up to his waist, to seem low-key, and take a picture of us. The photo definitely caught me staring right at the camera. The reason I know for a fact he took a picture is because his sound was still on. I immediately looked to my girlfriend to see if she saw what I saw, but she was on her phone. I then look over to my other side to see my friend Oliver death glaring the guy who took our picture. For visuals, this guy was probably in his mid to late 30s, around 5'8", and built like a thumb, short and stout. He had a mask so I couldn't see his face, but the mask had rhinestones on it. It was clearly trying to spell something out, but I couldn't read it. Oliver then looked over at me, and I gave him a look saying that I saw the same thing. We then texted in the group chat and went down, and everyone looked over at the guy. I think we were all waiting for one of us to speak up and say something about it, but no one did. One of the guys in our group, a 6'3", 250-pound football player, not someone to mess with, later said he saw the guy take a photo and he was tempted to say something but didn't want to cause a scene and potentially get us kicked. Very thoughtful of him, but I would also like to have seen an arse-whipping go down personally. The guy then got a call on his phone and walked away. Even when we were in the bar, I would occasionally look around to see if the guy made it up, but I never saw him after that. No one made a big deal about it, other than Oliver and I. I know my friends didn't see, but come on. How can you not ask a million questions right now? Is this man a perv, part of a human trafficking ring, or just scoping us out? FBI? Why would anyone want to be watching a bunch of college students? The point I'm making is that there are plenty of unanswered questions. Well, anyway, the next day I made plans with my girlfriend and Oliver to hang out. We were hungover from the night before, so I decided to head to McDonald's, whose hash browns have saved my life numerous times. We were in the drive-thru when a car pulls up behind us. Oliver looks in the rearview mirror and starts freaking. He says he didn't want to alarm anyone, but it was the man from yesterday. I look back, and it's him. I didn't see his face because of the mask the first time, and believe it or not, there are a lot of short, bald men that roam around these cornfields. I didn't want to believe it, so I said, yeah, it probably could be, maybe not though. I mean, what are the odds that we see the same man we saw yesterday in the city, in the middle of nowhere? Well, the odds were low but not improbable. The man pulled his car from the drive-thru, parked, got out the car, and put on a mask with rhinestones on it and walked into the McDonald's. As he was walking over, he clearly tried to look into the car, at us, and even walked too close for comfort, but Oliver had tinted windows. I mean, you can still see him, but you've got to focus really hard. So I felt better, but still a part of me wants to say it wasn't the same guy. But the other part knows it was. About a week after the McDonald's incident, Oliver needed a ride to his buddy's house to pick up a TV he bought from him. Oliver's car had broken down, and he was driving on a flat tire for months, and he had no bumper at the time. So I offered to give him a ride because he's my best bud, and it's how I got into this situation. I park on the street across from the house. Oliver gets out and goes in while I stay in the car. Oliver is a talker, so I know it's going to be more than just a few minutes, and after 10 minutes go by, I'm getting a little bit annoyed. So I look up at the house to see if he would just miraculously walk out, but instead I saw someone else. I saw the thumb-shaped man walking down the street with a little rat dog. No mask on this time, but his body shape was super similar to the last two experiences. He then hops off the sidewalk and starts walking diagonally towards this car with his rat dog. I start to get scared as it's 10 p.m. at night. Oliver works till late. I know 10 p.m. is not ideal time to pick up a TV, but there's no one else around other than the moths that are flying around the dimly lit street. So as this guy is approaching us, Oliver comes out of the house and starts walking over. The man switches his course and walks past Oliver and says something to him. I see him laugh and wave and then look through the car window as if to say, let's get the hell out of here. I start the car, and as we're leaving, I ask Oliver what the man said. Oliver said the man said hi to him at first, when he first passed, but then a few seconds later, as Oliver was a good distance away, he turned around and said, nice weather we're having, to which he goes, yeah, it is. We both discussed how odd that was, and how the man strongly resembled the guy who took our picture in the city. Nothing has happened since, but occasionally I will get the feeling that someone is following me in a store, or someone is watching me when I leave my friend's place late at night. Best case scenario is they're all separate events, with different men who look like each other, but I still cannot deny that taking pictures of strangers, looking into people's cars, when there are clearly people in there, and saying nice weather when it's 40 degrees out and late at night to a complete stranger, are all quite bizarre. I'm not sure what to make of it. Hopefully someone can give me some insight into what we're dealing with, because I'm feeling a little paranoid.
Where I live is a small town, Brentwood, California. Not where O.J. Simpson had his puzzling trial. We have an area code and around 50,000 residents, so you could say I lived in a small town. You kind of know everyone here. The mom of three you just saw in Ultra is now at Safeway. That's how small we are. But this is about my old crossing guard from my middle and high school. Middle school was about 4 years ago, and the crossing guard was always very weird. Now, I didn't walk home, but every morning and every evening, he was there yelling at kids to not cross. My mother and I looked over one day to find him scratching his nether regions around the children. Then, soon after, his whole head and face was shaved. Before,
He had all his hair, even a mustache. You could say that he looked like Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation. Just seemed odd, and I'm not one to judge people. People are people. We all have a special little thing about ourselves. But then he was gone, out of nowhere. He was gone by 8th grade year, which was still middle school where I live, and I was kind of relieved though. He kept getting weirder until he left. I'm now a sophomore in junior high school and saw him today at the Safeway Starbucks. Nothing odd really, just a small town, but it's just odd. I ordered a regular coffee for my mother and a frappe for myself, and while waiting for my drink, he stared me down. I'm 15 years old, 5 foot, curvy, and get a lot of looks. I look older than I really am, got up quick to fill the coffee with some cream, and I could see him looking at my ass in the glass wall they had. He didn't take his eyes off me until I turned around to look. So I'm waiting for my frappe and he gets up and shouts while looking at me. I jumped in my seat from fear, and he goes to ask for more ice at the pickup area and they politely declined, as he had asked before. I know you're thinking, this doesn't seem right, but then I see my drink is ready and I go to grab it. He's still waiting there even though they said no, and I grab a straw and walk away to tell my mum who's getting groceries. She remembers him all too well and wasn't surprised by the events that had happened. We walk around still and soon leave after about an hour and he's still there. As we pull out of the parking lot, there he is staring at my mother and I, very focused on us, and my mother looks over after a few seconds and then looks away whistling. This guy might just be a simple middle-aged man, but it takes a lot to get me creeped out, but he was able to do it. I hope I never encounter him again. He really freaked me out.
I saw a shadow person once. I didn't know that's what it was called until much later though. I was living in a house in Laguna Beach that had been there since the 1920s. In its history, it had been a speakeasy, a brothel, and a house for smuggling illegal immigrants. One day my new wife and I were having an argument. I can't even recall what it was about. She walked down the block to get a cup of coffee and cool off, and I was alone in the house. The way the place was built was incredibly haphazard. There was a bedroom and living room on one side. On the other side of the bathroom was a hallway that had windows in one side and 2 bedrooms on the other. From my bedroom I could look across the hall into the bathroom, then through the bathroom and down the other hall. I was standing at my dresser, and I just noticed movement from the corner of my eye, and looking down, there was, and honest to God, this gives me goosebumps just typing it out 17 years later, a black figure. It was maybe 3 feet tall, and it was only vaguely humanoid. It looked like black scribbles, like someone had scribbled a human shape, but the scribbles moved like electricity arcing. That's the best way I can describe it. There was no sound to accompany as far as I remember. I distinctly remember when I saw it I wasn't afraid, simply confused. Then it noticed me looking at it. I can't say it turned around, it just focused on me. And then I was scared. I didn't move, I didn't scream, nothing. I was just frozen. Because it came at me, it rushed down the hall towards me. I have no idea what it intended, but as soon as it entered the bathroom, the door closest to me just slammed shut of its own accord. Then I screamed. I yelled for my wife, but she wasn't home, and I went outside into the daylight and did not return until she came back about 10 minutes later. I don't believe in ghosts. I don't believe I saw something supernatural. But I do know I saw something. I simply don't know what it is. I'm in Australia, and I was at a karaoke bar late at night with my co-workers. Someone mentioned that a plane had crashed into a building in New York, but everyone in the bar assumed it was a small plane, or weren't that concerned because they were mildly drunk and having fun. but I saw it in my mind like I was experiencing the perspective of being a passenger on a large plane heading towards a huge building. I felt the deliberate nature of the event. I lost my crap. I said to one coworker, "Thousands of people are dead. This was deliberate. It'll change the world forever." And then I passed out. She took me back to her place. We were both drunk, so we both went to sleep. In the morning, my coworker came into the room I was sleeping in, and she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "You were right. Thousands of people are dead. It was a terrorist attack. How did you know?" And that was the end of the friendship that I had been building between us. I freaked her out too much. I had heaps of dreams about planes exploding in a bright blue sky. Those dreams stopped after that. I've had quite a few dreams that predicted the future or gave me information about something happening in the recent past or present before others knew. I don't believe in God, but it's really hard for me to deny the supernatural. I suppose it's like other things we don't really understand. Perhaps one day science might be able to confirm and explain this sort of thing.
Okay, let me take you back to where this all started. I was around 15. I'm fairly skinny and look about 45 kilos. My actual weight is 58, but I did a lot of sport. I'm pretty short, which makes me look a little younger than I am, and it all started while my sports team was training at a place that was on the outer region of the city where I live. While I was walking back home, I saw a group of grown-up men standing at the other side of the street. There were multiple people around, so I didn't really worry when one of them pulled out their phone and pointed it at me. The sun was setting, so at first I thought he was taking photos of the sunset or something. But as I continued walking, I saw that he was following me with his phone camera, and I felt very uneasy. I started walking faster. My dad has a shop in the street, so I usually went there first to put my stuff down, so that he could take it home with his car and I would walk. But at this day, I would stay at the shop and wait until he closed to just drive home with him. They would stay there more often, so I mostly just put on a bug jacket and tried to not get noticed, since I didn't know what else to do. The second time was during winter, and we were training in a closed sports center. It was fairly busy, and there was also a Christmas market, so I felt pretty safe. But when I was walking by, I saw someone filming me. Just like the first time, but it was a different dude, and I started to freak out in my head. I was wearing one of these very big scarves, and I just pulled it up to my nose. This happened a few other times, and I walked different routes, or asked someone from my sports team if they could give me a lift, since they were going in the same direction. In spring after that, when I was going shopping for groceries, there was a weird old man standing at the register. I didn't think much of it, and thought that he was maybe waiting for his wife. He looked at least 60. I still had a weird feeling, but didn't think much of it. Then when I was at the register, the woman scanned my items, told me how much it was. As I paid, I felt something on one half of my face. He put his head right next to mine, and I didn't realize that before. I was shocked, but just took my items, the leftover money, and rushed out as fast as I could. I'm still horrified, and I'm watching my surroundings and the people around me way more. I just hope that this guy stops filming and following me. It's getting to the point where I'm starting to be disturbed. This happened a year ago, when we were on a mall having a good time. But there was about 7 of us. 6 of us were 14 and one of them 13. These details will be important for later. Many of my friends had started to leave. I was alone with the 13-year-old that was a relatively new friend. It was getting late and almost 10, and because of this we decided to go grab a coffee. So we went to grab one as we waited for our parents. Well, we're not the only ones. The Starbucks was still full of people. I said to her to just stay outside, and there were some tables where we could sit. The line was slow and the coffees were ready in 15 minutes. They were understaffed because the place was about to close. I go outside and see a grown man, who seemed overweight, in the same table almost touching my friend. She was quite uncomfortable with the situation. I'm not very tall, but I'm a bit overweight, with a lot of my weight concentrated on my legs. He was still a fair bit taller than me. As I approached, we engaged in conversation. "Who are you?" "I'm her boyfriend." The guy then laughed in a way that made my blood boil. "How can you be interested in something like him? He's a kid. You need an adult." Now, I'm gonna be honest. This really pissed me off. I wouldn't say I'm handsome, 4 out of 10 perhaps, but she stood up and backed away from him, and told him to leave her alone. I couldn't comprehend why this guy was coming after her. She was so visibly underage. Then a barista came out of Starbucks and just stared at us. I felt confident in that moment to give him a really stern kick to the balls as he was distracted, and then we legged it to the parking lot to wait for our parents there instead. We became closer friends after that. She's been through some stuff, but it still annoys me that these older creeps really think that they're gonna get lucky with a 13-year-old girl. I mean, how perverse can you be? I felt a shadow person once. Back in December, I had been up for about 4 days on a methamphetamine binge, and on the 4th night, I stupidly decided to take an Ambien to try and get some sleep. I ended up being awake through all of it, and started to see dark silhouettes walk by me only a few feet away while I was on the couch. Eventually this progressed into crowds of them walking by, as if people were just getting out of a movie theatre or concert. Soon after, I looked across the room and saw 2 figures that looked like a guy in a lab coat and a girl in a dress, silhouettes from afar, talking to each other, and I made the mistake of staring too long. They seemed to notice me looking, and the girl figure proceeded to walk towards me, and when she got close, she put her arms out. I freaked out and went to slap her away when she got too close, but then I did feel my hands make contact with her arm. I then turned, shined the flashlight from my phone on her, and she was completely gone. This was by far one of the scariest things I've ever experienced, and I still get chills just thinking about it. About a year ago, I woke up bright-eyed in the middle of the night. I was on my side facing my husband, and the closet on the other side. For a clearer picture, we had taken down the closet doors when we moved in, since we hated bifold doors, and just hung a curtain that always drew aside. We have 2 long hanging baths for clothes all the way across the double closet, one across the top for his, and midway down across for my clothes. When I woke up, I was already staring at a spot about midway. There was this scaly black demon with red eyes perched on my hang bar, while holding with one arm the top bar, where his head reached between 2 jackets. He just sat there staring at me with his mouth open and very slowly started moving and creeping down towards the closet like he was moving towards my husband. I couldn't do anything except watch with my eyes pounding to my ear. I must have snapped out of it at some point because I blinked and it was gone. I finally could move and got the courage to get up and move over to the closet. I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, of course. I didn't want to close the curtains, I guess, because I figured if it came back it would be better to see it moving instead of wondering if something was behind the curtain. Had to be sleep paralysis. No idea why, but it damn freaked me out for a good few nights after that. In October of 2017, my stepfather Tank passed away. Everyone I know believes he actually did pass away. I never did believe it though, although there are records of his death. Now, I say this because I've had some odd encounters with someone that looks, sounds, and walks with a cane like he does. He stood at 6'1" and weighed roughly 260 pounds. He was 54 years old upon death and was a Hispanic Latino with a dark olive complexion and somewhat unruly facial hair. So in late October of 2017, he apparently passed away during an examination for an amputation he had about 6 months prior. This is all in a small town in northwest Pennsylvania. And 3 years after he had passed, I'd seen him around multiple times, and when I went to say, "Tank, is that you?" I'd get either no reply and looked blankly at, or just walked away from, as they turned pale as a ghost. It was from May of 2018 when the following events started to happen. At first, it was just a dream that I had where I saw him after he faked his death. This happened about 4 or 5 times in vivid detail. However, in October of 2018 is when I really started getting weirded out by suspicious activity. About this time, I started to see a 2005 candy apple red Ford Crown Victoria with slightly tinted windows stopping in front of my house at random hours of the day. These are the exact same details his car had that he was driving around in. But when it would stop, I would see someone that would resemble him exactly in the driver's seat. I would look at them, and they would turn their head to me and point in a style that I knew he did, that only me, my mother, and his cousin that lived in California knew. Thumb tucked in the closing fist on the left hand, index finger straight out, and pinky finger softly resting on his ring finger. He would only do this to me, his cousin, and my mother. It would signal that he wanted to privately talk with no one else around, so no one else would be able to know what he spoke about, and that everything said was meant between the person he was talking to and he, and that the conversation never existed. However, when this happened, I would walk to the car, but then Tank, or the person in question, would drive off, almost as if in a panic before I got close. This kept happening for about 5 months, when it just mysteriously stopped completely. And things became tame for a while. I thought it was all in my head, as if I was just missing him or perhaps something mental. But in June of 2019, I was out shopping for groceries with my housemate and his mother at the Walmart in our location. As we pulled in, there it was, that red Crown Victoria, pulled in 2 cars down from us shortly after we arrived. This time I wasn't the only one who saw it. About a minute later, we see what looks dead on exactly like Tank following us into the store and even grabbing a power card. This time I know I'm not mental. This was legit, because he even sounded and spoke like Tank talking to others and even employees. But he went to the automotive section of the store, which was his favorite place to go when he was alive. We hurried away to the food aisle and quietly talked about what happened and couldn't figure out what was going on. We ultimately left with only a few things because we were on a tight schedule that day, and when we left, his car was still there. We started to see him periodically from time to time, but wouldn't talk to him because we were just busy with what we were doing. One day, though, things were different. It was just me and my housemate. We got our shopping down, and he was in the same checkout line as us. And right in front of us, I finally grew the nerve and said, "Hey Tank, is that you?" And my only response was a man looking back at me in the eye. He turned a bit pale and told the guy to hurry up and print his receipt, and even pulled out a 50 and told the cashier to keep the change and took off his stuff and hurried out the store. From that day onwards, about 3 times a week, the same Crown Victoria rolls up to our house sometime after dark, with its lights on, and I even get calls on my cell phone to an ID that reads "Caller PA." When I answer it, all I get is light breathing. I always look out the window while on the phone, and whomever it is flashes the lights. I always head out to see what's up when I do, and my housemate comes with me, and the person drives off in a hurry while my phone just keeps giving me the rapid beeps as if I was hung up on. I tried to call back the last time, and it doesn't ring. I only get beeping sounds. In the past month, I've seen this man and his cane around the house of my home, and even once inside it, but his back was turned when I saw him. While out of eyeshot, whomever this person is ran downstairs and out the house as I took pursuit. When I got outside, with the only door leading into the house was wide open and my broken-tipped machete, there was no one, just eerie silence. I went back in and locked the house, and my housemate was in with me and followed me, but didn't know what that was, and he asked how they got in. I'm actually kind of scared, and the police will not investigate because I don't have any evidence, and they already have copies of his death records on file, and said I must be hallucinating from either stress or depression. But if that were the case, how did 4 others see him at the same time? I don't even know what's going on here. I can't be mental. Did my stepfather really fake his own death and is stalking me? Or is this something else entirely? About a year ago, I decided to make an impromptu journey to Poland in search of relatives I'd never met, but had only heard of via my ancestry research and an American cousin who reached out to me. As a lover of travel and languages, I was eager to go alone and see how I'd do. I learned some Polish in college and have been traveling worldwide since I was 21. Before going to the rural southeast of Poland, I made the most of the trip by first exploring Krakow, an amazing city, with buses and trains being the prominent mode of intercity transport. I lugged my suitcase the 40 minutes to the vast station to buy me a bus ticket to the next stop, ancestral homeland. Now, being a country girl growing up, I am still learning how to be adept at public transport and maneuvering people in streets. I'm also shy and not great at social skills, but normally that doesn't stop me. The main bus/train station at Krakow is also a large fancy mall, and I was delighted to find McCafe with free Wi-Fi. My phone service does not extend to Europe, so that's all the contact I had. I settled in and messaged a friend back home to my whereabouts. The McCafe had the aura of a Starbucks, but the cheap prices of McDonald's, another plus. It was relatively busy and open to the public view where I was sitting, at a one-person booth next to an outlet to charge my phone before the long journey. However, my sanctity was not to last. After a short time, an older, gruff-looking gentleman with a thick, tattered winter coat sauntered in and immediately headed my way. He seemed to be in some kind of construction work, as his coat was very warmly padded and dirty, with the characteristic reflective yellow and orange colors. It did strike me as a bit strange, since this station/mall was more travelers and shoppers than blue-collar workers. As for him heading my way, I figured with the laptop he held out ahead of him that he was just looking for a plug, as I had been. Of course, mine was not the only outlet amid the moderately spacious cafe, but he chose to sit directly next to me, almost touching shoulders, and plugged into the second of 2 plugs I was using. Sometimes people don't have a sense of personal space. I guess this outlet was the closest to the entrance. I shook it off, and he proceeded to speak to me and gesture at his laptop. I got the sense that he needed some sort of technical assistance from me, a youth, and figured that would explain why he sat next to me. I helped him set up the laptop on his Wi-Fi in broken Polish, and he thanked me by kissing my hand emphatically and smiling like he'd won the lottery. I noticed an icon at the bottom of his screen showing he had a Ukrainian keyboard equipped, and it was confirmed with what I heard earlier of his accent. He kept looking my way even though he no longer needed assistance, and I pretended to be busy on my phone, even though my friend on the other end wasn't necessarily responding quickly. I didn't really want him to talk to me. He kept his laptop slightly turned my way intentionally, as if he wanted me to see what he was doing. He opened up Facebook and started a FaceTime call with a woman around his age or perhaps a little younger, and pointed the camera towards me to show her and said something I couldn't understand that well. I assumed he was telling her how I'd helped him out, but their conversation seemed strained, and she made a forced smile at me briefly before they began talking loudly at each other again. I tried to mind my own business, but it was awkward being in view of his FaceTime call and it being so loud that others in the cafe looked over at him. The call ended soon thereafter, and I thought he would leave. But instead, he closed his laptop and proceeded to question me. I tried my best to answer in broken Polish mixed with English, and he seemed to understand well enough. He was amicable, although dramatic, and every time I finally understood something he said and answered him satisfactorily, he would laugh and kiss my hand and not relinquish it. Now, before venturing to Poland, my cousin had warned me that the rural old-fashioned men may kiss a lady's hand in greeting. With this in the back of my mind, I wasn't sure if he was in the realm of cultural normality for the region or if it was too much. Being the socially awkward person that I am, I decided to let it go, especially considering I'd been traveling alone for 2 weeks at that point. I supposed some human-to-human interaction would not be totally unwelcome. However, his questions, despite the friendly smile he posed them with, were increasingly invasive, since he seemed, again, to not be one for respecting personal space. I chalked it up to him being too friendly, but innocent enough. He asked why I was here, and where I was from, and going to, what my phone number was, and if I needed something later in my travels, that he could return the favor I gave to him. That one sent me off. Even if he's ignorant to social norms and space, that one was odd even for an old-fashioned man. I didn't mind obliging him though, because my number would be useless in Europe anyway, and gave him an alias instead of the real name. During this conversation, he kept saying I didn't need to leave for the bus yet, and it morphed later into, I needn't go on the bus at all, I could stay a while with his family. He insisted that he would repay me for my help. All I did was click McCafe free Wi-Fi and accept the terms. It didn't seem like too much to warrant this much gratitude, but who knows with boomers. I mean, he managed to use FaceTime just fine. My thoughts were fluttering around in my head, and I kept declining and said my family would be waiting for me. A lie, we'd never met, and they didn't even know of my existence yet. But he said for me to just tell them I'd come later, and to stay with him and his family instead. He also insisted on buying me a coffee, even though I hadn't finished the one I bought myself, and caused a fuss when I kept saying no. Mind you, this whole time he was still leaning towards me and holding onto my hand tightly. I was getting sweaty. Because of it, it was hard for me to try and collect my things and leave, or even shoot a message to my friend. What do I do? He called to the cashier at the counter and about 10 feet away asked for him to bring me a coffee. The cashier replied that the man may walk up to the register and place his order, but he refused twice. His friendly demeanor when speaking to me was gone, as he nearly yelled at the cashier to meet his demands and threw the cash onto the table for him. The man turned back to me and was smiley again, and insisted I stayed to drink the coffee with him and chat. He knew when my bus was leaving, and where it was going. He knew because he'd looked over my shoulder at my ticket when it was resting on the table next to my phone. I had it out to memorize the pickup location and time, and again, my hand held hostage in his, I didn't have a chance to move the ticket out of sight. He was blatantly stalling me and still insisting on me going to see him and his family. I finally got upset, not wanting to miss the bus and waste my money on that ticket. Plus, I had a ride waiting for me, expecting my arrival at that particular time, and in my limited Polish, I told him just so. The people pleaser in me was torn, but ultimately the hostess who would be awaiting me had won out over the man glued to my side. Somehow he finally let up and nodded sadly when I said I must leave now. I gulped the burning hot coffee he bought just for show, and not look ungrateful or wasteful, and thanked him for buying it for me. He refused my thanks profusely and insisted he owed it to me, and he still had a hold of my hand. He kissed it again and again, holding it like lowly servants do in the cartoons to the lovely princess they're indebted to. I put up with it once more with the hope that it would soon be over. He pulled me closer as he did this and reached down my shoulders like he wanted a hug goodbye, and I put up with this too, despite all his rude insistence. It still felt like he was overly friendly, perhaps lonely, and felt bad just walking away. His sudden jerk of my arm, closer to him, slid me along the booth, closer to him, and he hugged me tightly. He kissed my cheek. Ugh. But when I thought he was letting go, he grabbed my face, forcefully with both his hands, and turned it into his, and he kissed me on the lips twice, desirously, as if he were a Casanova movie star and I his femme fatale. It was disgusting, and he did it in full view of the other customers sitting across the way. They'd thrown awkward glances our way throughout the entire encounter, since we were the only ones talking and laughing in the cafe. They especially had noticed his loud demands to the cashier. I was in too much shock to notice if they'd seen the last part, and I honestly didn't care. I had 5 minutes to reach the bus amid a huge bustling station that I'd never been to before. As soon as the stupid old man let go, I made an obligatory forced half smile and a goodbye, and escaped on shaky legs into the crowded walkway. I knew I'd missed the bus, but I had to leave the cafe anyway to escape. The next bus wasn't for 6 more hours, and the man was probably still there just inside the mall area, and I didn't want him to spot me again. I waited at a different fast food place, closest to the buses, and in sight of a police officer standing at the mall entrance just in case I saw him once more. Being in a different time zone from my family and friends, I felt I had no one to comfort me, and made the mistake of frantically posting on Reddit in another sub. I got yelled at more security for resting my shaking feet of the bar on the chair beside me, and broke into tears. I only told my one night owl friend from earlier when she came online later, and as I didn't want to worry my parents or boyfriend about me traveling alone. To this day, they don't know what happened. Who knows what he was really up to? Or maybe he really did want me to meet his family. I'll never know. I felt so gross and disgusting physically that I covered my mouth and tongue with hand sanitizer that I had on me. This was in February 2020, but coronavirus had yet to be confirmed in Poland. Mentally and emotionally, I was exhausted and distraught, of course, because I mostly felt stupid for letting things get that far. So scruffy old man, let's never meet again. I was in a room in my house at night, and I had the lights out, and a candle was lit on a table roughly in the middle of the room. The candlelight was causing all the normal things in the room to cast shadows. However, on one wall, there wasn't anything but a box against the wall, and I might add there was nothing between the candle and that wall but the box. So on that wall was a box up against it, and the box's shadow. Well, at some point I looked up, and there was a shadow of a man sitting on the bed, but there was no one else in the room but me, and it wasn't my shadow. The shadow of the man was very clear. I blinked and rubbed my eyes. I even looked away several times, but when I slowly twisted my head back, it was still there motionless. It stayed for several minutes, and I was pretty much frozen in shock and fear. Eventually I looked over and it was just gone. Just the box, and its shadow remained. I'd like to add I was an extreme skeptic. I pretty much don't trust anybody's account of the paranormal. I did not believe in ghosts or shadow people. But since the incident, something's changed. Nothing short of seeing something for myself was ever going to make me a believer, and I never expected to have that encounter. Now I know for a fact these things exist. By these things I mean what I saw. But as to what it was, I can't fathom an explanation. When I was younger, I used to get sick a lot. Strep throat and ear infections often bring about very high fevers, and they lend themselves to hallucinations. My mother was no stranger to me spinning wild fantasies while lost in these dark reveries. I once told her I ate glass and was absolutely convinced that it was true. So much my mother started to believe me. I was around 11 or 12 on vacation with my family in Hawaii. Naturally, because I'm always the party downer, I developed a terrible ear infection complete with a dangerously high fever. Hallucinations struck at about midnight when I woke up from pain in the ear. I was sleeping on a convertible couch in the front area of this little grass house and saw through the sliding glass door an elderly woman rocking in a chair on the porch. She was shrouded in a dark cloak so that I couldn't see any of her features, but I still knew it was an elderly woman. She slowly stopped rocking and turned to face me directly, and then reached a skeletal hand up to lower the hood of her robes. As the moonlight revealed her features to me, the idea of an elderly visage melted into a bare bone of a skull. Her eye sockets were empty, but I still knew that she was staring at me. I'm not sure how a skull grins, but at that moment she did just that. Then she looked up, collected her scythe, and walked off the porch. I looked out the living room window that my bed was situated under to watch her stand a little ways away, and watch the process of people make their way down the beach. As the party of people drew closer, I saw they were carrying a casket. A little boy was trailing behind the procession looking blue. The casket was set beneath my window by the group of people, and the lid was opened to reveal the same little boy that I'd seen. He was following his own funeral. It was in that fever-riddled moment that I understood. I was going to die someday. Thinking about what I saw that night still leaves me with a ball of fear spinning wildly in my abdomen. 17 years later, that memory turned me right back into a terrified little girl. Before I start the story, there are a few things you need to know. I am an artist, and I've always been very in my own world, almost as if I were always thinking of a story or character or picture I wanted to draw. I'd walk into wars, forget anything, anywhere, and place items in the strangest of places while I was thinking. To give you an idea to the extent of this, my first place to look for anything I've lost is the fridge or freezer. I found remotes, my cell phone, art equipment, anything really inside there. Second, I've always had a very negative view when it comes to alcohol or any other narcotics. I don't mean to shame anyone if you're hearing this, but it was always something that I generally regarded as pointless. However, if you find enjoyment in it, all the better to you. Third, I'm an asexual person. I never desire it or have any interest in finding a mate, so flirting usually flies over my head. And finally, due to my childhood, I have a mild case of anxiety disorder, which has lately been worse due to this event and escalated by others. So now that you have a good understanding about me, let's begin. This particular story begins when I graduated from an upper secondary school for visual arts. Upper secondary is the type of high school there is in Scandinavia. I had a decent enough grade, my best being biology and English, and art, of course. I immediately looked for work after graduation, since I had graduated half a year late due to some health issues and the entrance exam for universities were already done. So, by the time I graduated, I had around a year and a half before I even had the possibility of applying for uni. I also sent hundreds of applications to any place that would take me, and hardly even got invited for an interview. This all took its toll on me. The constant rejection triggered depression, and I'd hardly leave the house, and I stopped taking care of myself altogether. I wouldn't shower, put on makeup, brush my teeth, anything. I'd avoid mirrors and felt as though I was a complete and utter failure, which was not made better by my parents who pressured me with, "How many applications did you send today?" Or, "You really need to get this job so you can start saving to move out." This might sound mean, but they don't mean it in a bad way, since I'd expressed the need to get my own flat for the past few years. Not to mention my relationship with my parents at the time was very strained, and my depression made me very irritable and angry, so I can't really blame them for pushing me to get out of the house. This continued for around half a year until I finally got a job in a supermarket about 8 miles away from where I lived. Life really picked up from there. I started to take care of myself once again. The people I worked with were all very nice and I had no issues with anyone, though they were very normal, so I'd get invited to get-togethers or have a pint after work. I always made an excuse why I couldn't go and would play MMOs or something instead at home. This might sound sad, but I enjoyed myself more like that. Fast forward a year of working and I was accepted into my number one choice of university. And due to this, I cut my work hours to half. I was only at work 2 to 3 nights a week. This particular supermarket chain I worked at had a yearly festival week gimmick to boost sales, and this year we were handing out scratch cards at the checkout. Apparently, the chain had a contest with every location, and the winning supermarket would be given an €1,000 cash prize for employee refreshment purposes, i.e. booze. Our supermarket decided we'd take everyone out for a night of drinking in a hotel/resort area connected to the shopping mall for our workers with the money. No surprise there, and since I had grown to be close friends with many of the other employees, it was motivation for us to win. Even if I didn't enjoy going out, everyone in the department was so excited for it, it was kind of infectious. Long story short, we won, and we went drinking. Our boss was ecstatic with how well we did, and how motivated we were. He even opened us a tab in the first bar we went to, so I had quite a bit to drink. When the first bar shut, we went with our own money to continue to a nearby nightclub. I hardly remember anything else, other than I drank like a sailor and sang karaoke horribly. We stayed until closing time, and I made my way to the train station to catch the last train home. On my way, I was stopped by a man with a thick accent, who asked if he could walk me home. I laughed and just said, "No worries." I was literally a few steps away, and motioned towards the station. He then apologized and said he thought I lived in the student buildings nearby and went on his way. I thought it was quite an endearing way to ask someone out, and thought nothing more of it. Another year passed by, and I was now living alone in a student block not far away from my parents' house. The area I moved to was very poor, since it consisted of only students, so in a weird way I actually felt very safe living there. The walls were as thin as paper, so everyone else could hear if anything happened to me, or if anyone tried to break into my home. Granted, I got an email from the company that funded the cheap student blocks that the bike seller in your address was broken into, but I never kept anything in there, so it didn't faze me. Sometimes I'd even forget the keys on the lock in the front door and would wake up in the morning to a neighbor ringing my doorbell and handing me the keys with a joking, "Nothing to steal, eh?" There was also a very convenient bus that stopped right outside my door that I could take for both school and work, though I needed another bus to get all the way to work. One Saturday, after a 9-hour shift at work, looking and feeling like a total zombie, I was making my way to the bus stop through an underpass late at night, when I heard someone call out to me through my earphones. I always stopped if I heard someone call out to me when I was near work, since it was usually a colleague offering a lift, or a regular customer wanting to crack a joke, or one of the guys from GameStop upstairs wanting to talk to me about Skyrim or something. I was basically friends with nearly every employee in the mall at this point, so someone stopping me late at night in a sketchy parking lot or an underpass was relatively common. I didn't recognize the man, but then again, I handled around 600 customers every day, so I hardly ever did. I also was conditioned to flash a bright smile through years of customer service whenever I met anyone's eyes, even outside work. I'm sure the ones who've worked in customer service jobs for long enough can relate to this. The man spoke hurriedly in a thick accent about how he was in love with me and how he had been watching me. It was very hard to make sense of anything he was saying. He spoke almost like it was a stream of consciousness. What I did make out was that he had seen me in a bar, which he named, and ever since he had been watching me and never before found the courage to talk to me before now. I was unsettled by the choice of words, but chuckled to him, not being a native speaker. I listened to him while I nervously eyed the underpass, feeling glad that there were a few people walking through it during this whole spiel. After he quieted down, I just awkwardly said, "Okay, thanks, but I need to go or I'm going to miss my bus," and turned to continue on, when he grabbed me and pushed me towards the wall of the underpass. I was around 30 centimeters taller than him, but he had a lot of mass over me, since the most sport I had ever done was acrobatics and ballet, and I'd quit even that many years before. I considered punching him or screaming, but I felt it better not to escalate the situation, so I sternly told him to let me go and that I needed to get to the station. He pleaded for me to give him a chance and said that he wouldn't let me go before I did. I was racking my brain about the safest way out of this situation, so I tentatively told him, "What if I save your number, and I'll see if I call you?" I had used this on another persistent suitor before and it had worked just fine. Now I wish I'd never said those words. The man's face lit up and he started to spell out his name. He was from somewhere in the Middle East. While I pulled out my phone and hammered his name and number into my phone, sighing in relief, I was almost back at my house. He suddenly grabbed my hand and tore my phone from it. At this point I angrily screamed, "What are you doing? Give it back!" But to my horror, everyone had moved from the underpass and I was alone with the creeper. He ignored me, struggling and screaming completely, and calmly just called his own phone number from it, before handing it back to me, as if what he just did was completely normal. I stared at him, terrified and dumbfounded. Then he hugged me tight, cupping a feel and tried to kiss me. I hurriedly blocked his mouth with my hand and forcibly pushed him away. I didn't say anything anymore. I just ran out of the underpass and he didn't try to stop me. When I was safely at home, I blocked his number first, then deleted it, thinking any deity possible that when I moved out and got a new phone, my father had insisted on an unlisted one, so he couldn't find my address out by Google. I asked my manager to not give me the Saturday night shift for a while and explained the issue I had with her. I also asked her if he could be banned from the store or something, but she told me that she couldn't do anything before I filed a restraining order. Obviously, I had no idea what the man's name or number was anymore. Not to mention, getting a restraining order on him based on what I had as evidence was very unlikely. A few weeks went by, and he showed up when I was at work without fail, as if he knew my shift, even though I had a different shift every week. He would just stare at me from outside the shop, or buy a single lollipop or something else, something cheap, multiple times a day, paying with cash, so that I had to extend my hand out to him, which he always took and held for as long as possible if there was no other customers there. The horrible thing about this was that it was not unusual to get a creepy customer every so often. Every now and then you'd get them if you worked as a cashier. Mentally ill or just socially inept, desperate people mistake customer service as genuine interest, painfully often. And you hardly paid any more attention to it than the other customers, since nearly always it's a short-term kind of thing and harmless. The man could have been stalking me for God knows how long, and I don't think I would have noticed. The thought that I only noticed this now that I'd had the earlier encounter with him, was enough for me to lose sleep over, and getting recurring sleep paralysis nightmares of someone entering my room and breathing heavily in my ear as a result. This went on, and it was now a few days until I had 8 weeks off work for summer vacation, which I had requested, half paid, half unpaid. The thought of not having to go to work and face the man every day was enough to cheer me up, so I threw myself into an extracurricular school project, a game for a museum exhibit. One day I had stayed at school working on a 2D rig for said project until school was closing and the janitor ushered me out of the classroom. I had a little while before my bus was due to arrive at the stop, so I decided to catch some fresh air after working nearly 12 hours on the computer and walk to the nearby station that was at the end of the line. The bus was already waiting, so I rushed in, and after I paid the fee, I faced the back of the bus and my stomach turned. There he was, with 3 friends, the guy in a thick accent. My stalker. We were the only passengers. I contemplated exiting the bus, but the next one wouldn't be for at least an hour, so against all common sense I decided to stay on. I sat at the very front of the bus hoping he wouldn't notice me, but as soon as the bus left the station he moved to sit next to me, and his friends moved to sit beside me, as if he knew this was the line I usually took, and just waited so that I couldn't exit the bus. I was ready to throw up,
so I turned the music in my ears so loud it hurt. I ignored every tap and shoulder grab. I clenched my laptop back on my lap, ready to sacrifice my computer and smack him in the face with it if he tried to do anything else. Then the realization hit me. This line stopped literally on the front door of my building. My name was plastered on the front door of it. He would know where I lived. I felt as though I could burst into a howling cry at any minute. My thoughts were going a mile a minute, considering everything that could happen to me if I didn't have a way to get out of this situation. I knew there was a longer stop coming up later, so I decided to try and make my break there. When the stop rolled around, music still breaking my eardrums, heart pounding, I said, "Sorry, I need to get off," and made my way to the mid-doors. All 4 men followed me, speaking fast in what I assume is Hebrew. When the door opened, I stepped out and walked for a while, before suddenly turning back and running like I was possessed, back into the bus and yelling at the driver, "Please drive, just drive!" The driver looked taken aback, looked at the men who were running towards the bus and back at my face, twisted into loud sobs and how I was shaking, and decided I was serious. He closed the doors and sped off. He stopped the bus at a garage a few miles away and asked if he could do anything, like call the cops. I just kept crying and retold my first encounter to him, when something in my head clicked. The bar. He had specifically named it. It was the nightclub we went to continue our drinks over a year ago when we won that contest. I had never been after I had visited that time. He said he saw me there. He had been tailing me for over a year. That night, he was the one who offered to walk me home. That's why he showed up at my work without fail whenever I was working. I sobbed, howled like a damned tortured cat, and the driver told me to go lie down in the back and that he'd drive me home. I told him it was the last stop. The driver dropped me off safely home before he continued his round, risking his job for my safety. I couldn't thank him enough. I didn't even know his name. After the second incident, I called in work sick until my vacation and cut my hair and dyed it black. I also spent the vacation biking around my hometown during the day, not venturing to the town my work and school were at for the whole 2 months. I occasionally still sometimes have those sleep paralysis nightmares, but very fortunately, I never saw him again. A small part of me thinks it's because he doesn't want me to. One thing's for sure though, I never left my keys in my lock again. So to the creepy man with the thick accent, I implore you, never come looking for me again. And took a new position as a high school librarian. There was a little snack bar run by the cafeteria workers in the student center. Bill was the guy who manned the register for the snack bar. He was a short man in his late 50s, always had a smile for anyone who came to visit, and he really loved it when the adults of the building came by to get food or drinks, and would start a conversation with anyone who would stop to talk. He seemed sad and lonely. Over the first few months of stopping by there for my morning tea, he would always ask me questions. I was in a serious relationship at the time, and had been with my partner for 6 years, and we had a child together. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know me. I never got any weird vibes from him. He seemed like a sweet father/grandfather type figure. Over the summer between my first year of working and my second, my boyfriend and I broke up. I didn't talk about it at work when I could help it. It was painful to talk about because we'd been together for so long and had a child. I was trying to date online. I was on the main ones: Facebook dating, Tinder, Plenty of Fish, and Bumble. I live in a pretty small town, so the same men were on the same apps, and went on a few dates, but overall the entire process was a disaster. I only stayed on the apps for that first full semester of my second year, and then deleted them all to remain single. During this time, Bill's attention started to change. He would get very excited when I came down to get my morning drink. He knew about my breakup and would ask me how dating was going. I didn't recall telling him I was single, but I assumed that I must have let it slip at some point in conversation.
I would come back in the mornings and tell him about all of my terrible dates, and I remember telling him that I was giving up on dating. He tried to hold my hand and comfort me, but I immediately jerked my hand off, and I told him I was fine with my life and that I wasn't going to date again until I was happy with just myself. Each morning that I went back, I noticed that he kept trying to find excuses to touch me. I had hair on my clothes, or that he needed to fix the alignment of my jacket, and I started to get creeped out by his attention. I stopped going down to get drinks and told him I didn't have the time in the morning anymore because the library was getting more kids needing me to check out books before school started. Since I wasn't coming down to see him, he started coming down to see me, and it started by just bringing me tea. If I wasn't at my desk, he would leave it for me to find. At first, I didn't mind too much. Things just appeared, and I didn't have to fake a smile when he was near. After a few weeks, it stopped being just tea. He started to bring me food too. "We just got a shipment of oranges," he said. "I picked out the best ones for you. I know how much you like them." The gifts became bigger and bigger, until he was bringing me full meals from the cafeteria. I started trying to think how I could get this to stop while also being polite. I had to be nice, right? Over time, I couldn't even eat the food. I would just give it away or trash it the moment he left the room. The next time he came down with his arms filled with free food for me, I told him that I didn't want him to bring me anything because I was on a diet and I was bringing my own food to school. "You're perfect just the way you are," he said with a big smile, and I replied with a thank you. Why do I feel the need to be nice to creepy people? When he would come in and I wasn't at my desk, I would duck down and hide until he left. The students started to ask what was going on. I'm a grown woman, the person in charge of these students, and I'm hiding on the floor behind a stack of books to avoid talking to him. The students even said that they don't like him, and they had nicknamed him the Troll. It was such a fitting name. Over time, he understood that I didn't want any more food from him. I had a month of glorious silence with no visits, just awkward waves in the hallway if I passed, and my second year as a librarian ended. When the third year started back up, I had a lovely summer without any thoughts of him. I walked into the library on my first day with a present on my desk. I opened the package, and it was a coffee tumbler with a gift card to Starbucks. No name or card to say who gave it to me. I wasn't sure if it was him, so I went down to ask, and he said he wanted to buy me something special and to have my school year start with a smile. I accepted the gift and thanked him. I'm not saying no to some free drinks, but I shouldn't have taken it, and I know that now. At least once a week he would bring me something, and each gift got more expensive and I became increasingly more uncomfortable. By October I told him to stop, not to bring me anything. Do not buy me anything, it makes me uncomfortable, and I will not be buying anything for you in return. But he didn't listen. He kept bringing me things I knew he couldn't afford on this cafeteria worker's salary, and told him to just stop. I started to get angry. I was no longer smiling or saying thank you, and I realized my biggest mistake now. I took the gifts. I took them because I don't have a lot of money, and the gifts were truly all things I needed or loved, and really, I should have never accepted them. I started to confide in other workers of how uncomfortable the whole situation made me. Most of them would just reply, "He's single and really nice and obviously likes you. I know he's older, but you should just give him a chance." I did not. With each unwanted gift, he would say, "I know you told me no more gifts, but I had to get this for you." On Valentine's Day of my third year working at this school, a giant gift basket was on my desk. I brought the entire thing back to him. I told him to take it back and that it was just too much. I guessed that it was about $150 for the entire thing. I told him to keep it. He said that if I took this, it would be the last gift, and he promised. I took it and made him repeat it again, that it was the final gift. I didn't get a chance to test this. By the next month, the entire country shut down for COVID, and I had to still be on campus to work despite all the students being remote. In April, he came to my desk with a goodbye gift. He was quitting his job because they could not pay any of the cafeteria workers without students on campus, and was moving away. I cried with him, partly because I'm empathetic when others cry, and mostly from relief. He was leaving, and I never had to speak to him again. The next day I had a friend request and a message from him on Facebook. I didn't respond or accept, but it did fill in some gaps from my knowledge. He had a car as his profile picture, and I remember the picture from all my online dating apps. That's why his demeanor changed. He saw me on all the dating apps and I had ignored him. For 8 months I thought it was over, and I didn't think about him. School started back up this past August with students back on campus. It was a relief not to worry about seeing him or finding random things on my desk, but in October my work phone started ringing. I was so busy I didn't answer, and the person called 5 times, and when I finally answered, thinking it was a very urgent parent, it was the creepy troll Bill. He had to talk to me. He was in love with me, and he spent every day thinking about me, and oh, by the way, he is married with grandchildren. Guess who's ready to leave his wife for me? Crazy troll Bill. He kept me on my work phone for 45 minutes and I listened. I was nice. In hindsight, I have no idea why I kept talking to him. I told him I wasn't interested in him in that way. He begged to be friends and I said fine. He asked me to accept his friend request and I did, and he tried messaging me the next day but I left it on read. 2 weeks later, I get a message from the front office that a representative from the company needs to talk to me. I rarely get sales reps coming in person, especially after COVID, so I go up front and it's the troll in a suit, with large bags under his arms. The secretary thought he must have been a regular because she recognized him but couldn't place him where. He asks to come in and to talk to me, but with COVID and safety rules no one was allowed in. I go outside in the cold and speak to him. He explained he just wanted to drop off a few gifts for me, and proceeds to take out each item from the bag and tells me where he was and how it reminded him of me, and why I had to have it. He brought things for my kid, nowhere close to what he needs for his age, and I'm panicking, my stomach hurts, and I feel like I'm trapped, but outwardly I'm polite and nice. He asks to hold my hand while he reads the poem he wrote for me, but I refuse and move as far away as I can manage. The poem he reads references a picture of me. He has the picture printed out, and he said it's his favorite. And I'm 14 years old in the picture. How far back did he go on my Facebook? And this man used to work in our high school? I tell him again I don't want to have anything to do with him, and he says that that's okay, that he just needs to be near me, and that he'll take any attention that I was willing to give him, and he just needed to be in my life. He goes in for a hug, but I try to get away, and I'm trapped between a tree and a bench. With his height, his face is buried in my breast, and his hand tries to sneak under my shirt, and I can hear him try to smell my hair, and I'm instantly sick. I sent him a Facebook message the moment I'm back in school. This time, finally, I am not nice, and tell him, no more gifts, period, none. This is a matter of consent, and I do not consent any more gifts. You say you care about me, but you do not respect my wishes. No more gifts. And after he responded and I was confident that he actually understood my words, I blocked him and changed the setting on my profile to make it harder to find. In November, a box arrived at the school, a subscription box that will be sent every month. There isn't a name who it's from, but I know who sent it. So I went to speak with the police on campus, but guess what? Not much they can do since I don't have proof that it's from Bill. I've called the company, but they cannot tell me who the account holder is, and the school is aware of the situation. They will hopefully remember him, if he ever tries to come back. The day before my birthday, he called my work phone 4 times. On my birthday, he called 5 more times, and I didn't answer. Yesterday, the second package arrived at the school with my name on it and the school address. I really hope this saga's over, but it might not be. I make sure I'm not followed when I leave work, but I do not have any clue what kind of car he drives. I have a special way I drive home now, where everything is single lanes, hopefully making it easier if I'm followed. I always check the caller ID before I answer my work phone, and I'm afraid of anyone who expresses an interest in me now because crushes are not cute anymore. I wait for more things to be delivered on campus, and I live in a constant state of panic because
What if he meant it? What if he has to be a part of my life, whether I like it or not? So to build a creepy troll, let's never meet again.
Shadow people. Everyone in my house sees them, and it's very weird. Everything started after my older brother's dream. In his room, there was a door next to a window, and both of them led outside. He always closed that door before sleeping. In his dream, 3 shadows were staring at him. They opened the door and entered the house. He felt very, very bad in the dream, and then he woke up, and the door was open. And after that, we always saw the shadows in our house. I really don't think they're good, but not bad. Strange things have been happening since then. Light bulbs exploding, mirrors falling off the wall, things moving, and sounds when we're home alone. We don't know what they are, but I think that someone is looking after us. My mum has a lot of porcelain dolls, a little room full of them, and she said that they're protecting us. I asked her what she meant by that, but she just smiled. Maybe, thanks to them, the shadows are not there to hurt us. But who really knows? One night I was going to sleep, and all of a sudden I started to sweat profusely. I tried to get up and turn on the AC, but I could not move from my bed. I was confused a bit and scared, and tried to shout for my sister in the next room over, but I couldn't speak either. At this point is where I saw a dark figure in the corner watching me. It felt like years until the silence broke, and it muttered in a distorted voice, "You're not safe." At this point I could hear my heart pounding like it was in my ear. Next thing I knew, the figure moved across the room to the foot of my bed. It stared into my soul, and then I could move. I was soaked in sweat, and that night I did not sleep. To this day I have never had sleep paralysis after that, and I wonder if I am really safe. I was in California visiting my brother, who went to Pepperdine. So me and my family are out shopping on this really big street full of amazing stores. The first night we were on the same street for dinner, and in fact, we spent a lot of time on that little strip. There was a homeless man sitting on the side outside the restaurant, and as we were walking out, my dad gave me a $5 bill to give to the homeless man. He had white hair and a long beard. He reminded me of Gandalf. I handed him the $5 and he said thank you, and nodded, and I smiled and skipped off back to my parents. Well, then I started noticing this dude everywhere, seriously everywhere, walking around the hotel parking lot and chilling out on the sidewalk like multiple times throughout the week-long trip. On our last day in Cali, we went back in the same area where I originally encountered the man. We were on our way back to the car, but we decided to go into the souvenir store really quick. My parents walked out with me. Being the third child, this is normal, as I'm not sure if my parents are even aware I exist sometimes. My life is literally the dark sequel to Home Alone. Once I realize my family are not in the store, I walk out the door trying to catch up when Gandalf the homeless man grabs me by the shoulder and literally turns my whole body to face him. He looks me straight in the eyes and tells me how beautiful I am, passes me a piece of folded up paper, hugs me so tight, this was weird by the way, and kissed me on the neck. Obviously I knew this was whack, and once I was fully aware of the danger, I untangled myself from him and booked it down the sidewalk to catch up with my parents. As I was struggling to get away from the man, he keeps repeating, "Don't show your mum, don't show your mum," over and over. Like, dude, come on, I'm obviously gonna tell her. Anyway, I run up to my parents, and I'm like traumatized, and they don't even notice. I open up the letter he gave me and it says, "I have been watching you. It's been such a pleasure being in your company for the last week. I find your smell and look so appealing, and you're the most captivating person I've ever come across." This was only a tiny fraction of the letter. There was much more to it, front and back. Unfortunately, I never got to read the whole thing because my parents finally noticed I have this weird, dirty, and crinkled up piece of paper, and the look on my face was priceless. My dad grabs it out of my hand and reads it, but not aloud. He gets about halfway down the paper, then screams, "That's disgusting," crinkles it up, and throws it aggressively in the trash. I wish I knew what it said, but it's probably best I didn't for my sake. There were so many questions like, how did this guy know my hotel? Was it because of the parking lot? I saw him once out the window wandering around the hotel, which was a good mile away from where I first saw him. How did the dude show up so many times in my week-long trip? Obviously, he was stalking us on purpose. Did he know it was my last night, and that's why he felt the need to give me a letter? Is he even homeless or just a creepy stalker that likes to prowl the streets for a new child? Who knows? I guess I never will. But I hope I never see him again. When I was a young chick, I worked for Starbucks for a while. Our store was in the worst part of town, in a retail park. The area consisted of council flats where the local council placed druggies, ex-cons, and people on various benefits, so although we had some nice customers who were there for a shopping spree, there were quite a few shady people too. A guy came in and acted like a regular, asking every girl about how we were, and we all had name tags. He was nice and chatty, but made our skin crawl. But the other girls loved him, and the guy started to come in daily. He usually came around 1 p.m. and stayed until 11 p.m, so when we closed. And sometimes, he was very pushy about staying even after closing. He always insisted on helping bringing in the outside furniture and stuff. Some managers and I were cautious, especially since we couldn't have anyone in this store after closing. He then started to pretty much groom girls, asking if they were single, then if they had boyfriends, favorite sex positions. Yeah. The youngest girl was 16. Mind you, I grew up with narcissistic parents, so I learned how to read people very early. I've always been interested in psychology and had studied it for a few years, and this guy irked me from day one. But I was nice to him because I'm very passionate about not starving to death, so I needed the job. One day he started to tell me that he had a fight with his parents and that they threw him out. He looked very sad and told me that he needs to sleep in his van, a white, unmarked van. However, since he knew I'm closing that day, he'd love to take me home with his car because it's not the nicest neighborhood. I almost laughed. This was such a textbook way to abduct young women. He was doing everything just as my lecturers had said a serial killer/rapist would do. Sadly for him, I'm not a normal girl. Thanks to my rather cruel upbringing, I scored extremely high on the psychopathy test. I'm psycho by nature, as I was informed. I'm not one though. I love cats. I just have to tell him no once without my fake smile for him to notice that I'm not prey. Then he moved on to another girl, and I notified the manager about his creepy behavior in order to protect our younger girlies. One of them was sweet, innocent, and oh so naive. The creepy guy targeted her after my next few shifts, and my shift leader also laughed in his face. He told this young girl his sob story and expected empathy, which he got, and she agreed to be taken home by him, and she even offered him to sleep on her couch. Fortunately, my manager was a mama hen type of woman, and she firmly told her young barista to be more careful around strangers, and that she would be going home with her. Also, the creepy guy was then banned from the store. The manager notified security around the park, and I'm afraid I won't have a happy ending to this story. All I know is that the police were later involved somehow, and he vanished from the area. So whoever you are, creepy Starbucks guy, let's not meet again. This story takes place between August and October of 2009. I was a graphic designer at an agency shortly after I left college. Every day was incredibly stressful. They never knew how to say no to the client, and always overpromised and underdelivered. Every project was an emergency. Finally, my then girlfriend, now wife, suggested that I try meditation. I am in no way a religious guy, But I can admit, strange and unexplained things happened outside the realm of what we understand as normal. So I did some minor research and started off with Kundalini meditation and borrowed an album from a co-worker to guide me through it. The first time I did it, I was just a little dizzy. There are a lot of breathing methods implemented in most meditations, but Kundalini asks you to do several different types. The next time, it was around 3 a.m. It was in an attempt to get me to sleep. My girlfriend was asleep, and I was sitting on the floor of our bedroom by the bed. I could hear my breathing, and my girlfriend's breathing, and distinctly the breathing of someone else. My eyes snapped open, and I turned around expecting Tina to be standing there, but there was nothing. I turned back around and was facing the doorway that leads out into a short hallway. That was when I first saw it. It was human-esque, but standing awkwardly, like this is not how it normally stands. It looked like it was struggling to stay on its 2 feet. I couldn't make out any detail. It was entirely black, not to be confused with an absence of light, but black as in color, and it was standing in a dark hallway. We have a wireless switch for our fan light, and I hit the light. Nothing was there. The next day, I dismissed the experience as to it being late, and I was trying a weird breathing exercise, so naturally, my brain must have just been playing tricks on me, and I overreacted as I was very tired. I went to work and came home. Tina called, said that she was running late, and that she would be back in a few hours. I said I would have dinner ready. The water was boiling with the pasta, and meat sauce was on a low simmer, and it had gotten dark. I had been playing a game when the timer went off, and suddenly realized just how dark it had gotten. I went into the kitchen to strain the pasta. This part happened in the blink of an eye, and I had the feeling that someone was there, like having your eyes closed and someone holding their hand in front of your face. I freaked out and thought it was an intruder, and turned quickly with a knife from the counter. With all the survival skills I have, I still dropped the knife when I saw it. It was only there until it was in my direct field of vision. It was, again, in perfect lighting. Still a totally black spot, not really reflecting any light. Still, no details inside the silhouette. I stood for what felt like forever, staring into the space that it had been possibly occupying, and darting my eyes around to the other dark places to make sure I was alone. I did not want to tell Tina about it, because a few years before, she had previously had night terrors and would wake up screaming. Weeks passed and my hesitation to walk into a dark room passed with it. Eventually I decided to leave my job because of the backwards work ethics, and they were not going to pay for the 2 weeks of off time I had not used. So I took the 2 weeks as vacation and decided to give my 2 weeks notice when I got back. It was going to be a staycation, sleeping as long as I could, playing games the rest of the day, and I would cook dinner and be all around relaxed when Tina got home. About a week in, I woke up briefly as Tina was getting ready for work and fell back asleep. What I thought was minutes later, something felt off and I opened my eyes. Out of the darkness of the hallway came a figure, like a rigid corpse being thrown at me, flying over me and landing on me. I sat up with a short scream. I was 28 years old at the time of writing this and had been working freelance from home since I left the job in 2009. I have seen what I like to call the stranger thing about 10 times. The sightings have not always been at night or inside the house. I have not seen them since earlier 2010, but I have also not practiced any meditation since those first few times. I have actually done several pieces of artwork on the thing I saw. My wife, in recent months, has also gotten into Kalandini meditation. Apparently this stuff happens a lot if you're not prepared mentally for the meditation. If you start slow and build your way up, it goes a lot better. But I had jumped headfirst off a cliff into full Kalandini and did not have a good time. It can work and be wonderful and fulfilling if you put the work in. Otherwise, it's pretty horrible.
It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I had just gotten home from school. I was so exhausted that I threw my bag aside and plopped into bed. As I drifted off to sleep, it didn't take long for it to become a lucid dream. In the dream, I decided to go for a walk, so it turned into the dreamscape of a mall. The mall would be like the ones that is partially outside. I always loved the holidays, so it was quite festive once I walked in. I turned a corner in the mall and noticed everyone was gone. The mall was empty. As I reached the center of the mall where the Christmas tree was, I noticed a tall figure in the overcoat standing behind the tree as if spying on me. Due to the lighting, I couldn't see his face, but it did seem strange. Right as I focused on him, people started pouring from different stores and other areas as if carrying on about their day. However, one thing was different about them. They were all giving me threatening looks, as if I was the one who didn't belong in my dream. This put me on edge, and I decided to make an exit at the door that led to the street. I looked to the left and to the right, and as I am on the long street in the city, all that can be seen in both directions is streetlights and kids trick-or-treating. It was at this time I figured I would pick a random group of kids and tag along with them. They took me to a haunted house. When we got there, we were faced with a large metal door that opened and closed by itself. It would count a certain number of people and let them in accordingly. I was lucky enough to be the odd number, so the kids left through the door, and then I had to wait for it to reopen alone. As it opened, I walked out, and the children were gone. Even if they were eager to go somewhere, I knew they couldn't have left me that fast. I looked left and right and the streets were empty. I looked to the right and thought it was empty too, until I saw him, the man in the overcoat, and the uneasy feeling began to set in again, as he began to slowly follow me. Growing nervous, I created an alley that led to a grocery store. It was a sudden shift compared to my normal created door that opens elsewhere, but I managed it by closing the alley behind me. I began walking down the aisles when something told me to turn around. That's when I saw him again. As I looked at him, the fluorescent bulbs didn't show every detail, but they showed enough. The man's skin was a light grey as if he were dead. I could see his skin through the trench coat, hugging his ribs and sternum. I could not see his eyes for some reason, but what I did notice was a horrible, elongated grin stretched across his face like the Jack Nicholson Joker. I was so distracted by that grin that I didn't notice he had started approaching me until he was almost in the aisle. In a panic, I began morphing aisles together, leaving a big space enough only so that I could shimmy through. I felt relief. I knew he wouldn't be able to make it through the crevice. As I turned around, I noticed the aisles were being moved back into position as he casually walked towards me. I couldn't believe it. He was following me in my dream and there was nothing I could do. I was trying to calm myself down now, and I thought I needed to wake myself up. I shut my eyes and awoke in my bed. I could tell by the sunlight from the window that I had only slept perhaps an hour or two. The sunlight caused me to squint and blink. But suddenly I was back in the dream, seeing the man was still approaching. I shut my eyes tighter this time and awoke again. That's when I noticed the closet was ajar. I blink again and I'm back. Once more I shut my eyes tighter than I've ever have before and awake. Now I'm in bed, closet wide open. The blanket was very old and had patches that were transparent, even though it was covering my head, and I watched through the material as the black man from my dream emerged from the closet, this time without his trench coat, and I could see the full extent of his torso excluding his face. I was surprised this man was not dust from the look of his exterior. He came out and just stood at the foot of my bed, standing there, and I dared not move at this point, despite the fact I was concealed under the blanket. He began to bend over. I wasn't entirely concerned because even though he was tall, I knew his face couldn't reach me. But then his torso began to stretch out towards me far enough for his mouth to be able to be right where the patch of material lay. I saw his mouth through the covers and nothing else. I had a horrible feeling come over me, telling me whatever I do to not look into his eyes. His mouth began to move slowly, as I heard multiple whispers that I could not make out. Before I could react though, he bent back into shape and returned to the closet. After I woke up, I stared at the closet for what seemed like hours. I've never been able to explain what happened to me that day, and have not been able to lucid dream since. I would like to, but I feel like I need to be prepared to deal with this entity again, in case, if I do it, he will return. Because I don't know how he leaked from my dreams into reality. My story takes place in Florida. I was around 12 to 13 years of age. At the time I was struggling with some family issues and school bullies. So I was in and out of school, and my mother and I were discussing putting me in homeschool. My aunt suggested a way to help me make friends and keep me in school. Girl Scouts. You read that right. Send me to the group of little girls that sells cookies and makes the whole United States fat and their mouths water at the thought of them. So I agreed because I was desperate for friends. When I say that, I mean I talked to stuffed toys and made up voices for them so that I didn't feel alone. Sad, I know. But this was the truth. It is also very important because I want you all to know where my head was. I ended up going to my first troop meeting. A week after the choice had been made, I was super excited. Sadly, it wasn't what I thought it would be. The girls there, although nice, were a bit hard for me to get close to. It was a small troop of about 5 to 8 girls, and they certainly ran in different social circles than me. Their parents were also way more gung-ho about this whole scout thing than my mother expected. They wanted this to be a stepping stone to their daughters' huge careers in college and classes. Anyway, after being part of the troop for 2 to 4 months, it didn't go well. The girls shunned me and I grew even more lonely. I even decided to approach a girl asking her why she didn't like me. She had no problem telling me, so my mum withdrew me. Another 2 to 3 months later, another troop showed up in our area, and my mother decided we'd give it another go. After all, not all girl troops are like that. People are different, and she was certain someone would want to be friends with me. She was really right. I did end up making friends. Not the entire troop was in love with me, but the troop leader's daughter and I had become the best of friends. Of course, my mother was thrilled. I finally had a friend, and was starting to smile again. It hurts parents quite a bit to see their kids upset. Her and I did everything together. We didn't go to the same school, but it didn't matter, because we'd have sleepovers every weekend. I'd go over to her house every other day after school and do homework. She had parties, lots of them. Anytime her mother thought her daughter had something to celebrate, she'd throw a big party for her, and being her daughter's best friend, I was always seated next to her. It was one of the happiest times of my life. I felt important to someone other than my family. I had a place to go outside my home, where trouble always seemed to lurk. A year turned into the second. We finished Christmas. She actually came to my birthday party and got me a gift and everything. Then things started to get weird. Because I was a year older than her, I had a bit more homework, being that I was also a grade level ahead of her. She had apparently convinced her mother to change her schools, so now she was attending mine. This was great, I was once again over the moon. The only sad thing was that we didn't have the same classes or the same lunch period. Well, that soon changed too. She showed up once for my lunch and I thought it was weird. Apparently her mother had pulled some strings and got her to lunch at my time.
I didn't know the details, I just knew my best friend and I could eat together. I remember telling my mum, and she didn't let on that anything was the matter. But later when we talked about this after I'd grown up a little, she admitted the news concerned her. Then, though, she just acted like it was the best news and I was happy. I started to go fishing with her and her uncle during the summer. Spent weeks over at her house with her mother and uncle. I'll admit the uncle was a bit different. I mean, he didn't set off any alarm bells, but he wasn't your usual uncle. As far as our Girl Scouts troop went, we became the leaders. We pushed our troop into camping trips and selling cookies more and more. It was great. I'd never been so highly regarded. The girls in the troop even began treating me like one of them. I was so happy to fit in. That ended up changing quite a lot, actually. Towards the end of the summer, I discovered her uncle wasn't really her uncle, more of a guy trying very hard to make her happy so that he could bang her mum. He eventually stopped coming round, and her mother, I noticed, drank a lot. More than I'd seen any adult drink at the time. The end of summer meant our trip was coming to an end, the last camping trip we would get before classes started up again. I was excited to go. My mum and I bought everything we thought I would need, and my best friend and I jumped right into the van. I waved goodbye to my mum, and away my troop went. Now, it's important to admit here that I had a love of horror stories. I've always loved spooky stuff and the occult, so the idea of a camping trip meant campfires and scary night stories. I was excited. Once we got to the campgrounds, I realized it wasn't going to be like camping with my family. It was a huge gathering of other troops all over. Older scouts, younger scouts, and us. Of course, the older scouts told us there were some creepy gnomes or troll-like creatures near the lake, but none of us believed them. It was a fun weekend, just not the same kind of fun I expected. I never got to tell my stories, and it was more about building teamwork and Girl Scouting stuff than I thought it would be. I know, what did I expect, right? You live and learn. Anyway, the last night I decided I would tell a ghost story. In fact, I insisted on it. So after the troop leader went to bed, my friend and I gathered all the troop in one tent, as we'd been separated into two, and the stories began. We each told a story, or a funny, embarrassing one, and then I was the last one to tell a tale. I told my story, scared the other girls, and we hurried back into our respective tents before daybreak. Then we all packed up and got our rides home. Everything was fine until the next meet-up for my troop, a week later. My mother and I showed up, and there were the adults looking very angry. Mothers, fathers, all of them. My friend's mother stepped up to my mum and pulled us aside. This is what I remember from that conversation. Listen, your daughter isn't welcome in the troop anymore. What? Why? What happened? Well, it seems that she told a story at camp, and it gave some of the other girls nightmares. The other adults requested she no longer come to troop meetings. Are you serious? It was just a story. You can't, she didn't know. She loves this group. This is where our friends are. Why didn't you tell me this early in the week when I was dropping her off at your house? The troop leader shrugged and sighed. At this point, I took off running away from my mother and friend's mother. I wanted to talk to my friend, to the other girls of the troop. I was going to apologize to them and their parents. I found my friend. She didn't seem heartbroken in any way. In fact, she was okay with it. My friend went on to say, I never liked sharing them with you anyway. They were all stuck up and snobby. They just didn't get you. I get you. We're like sisters. So now, you and I can be together more. What? But I liked the other girls and being in the troop, and what about when the troop meetings happen? So, you're asking me to quit the troop? I'll do that. I'll make my mum quit too. No more troop. No, that's not what I'm saying. Listen, we're best friends forever, remember? BFFs. Anyone who doesn't like you isn't a good person, and I don't like them. It was the sweetest and nicest thing I'd ever heard from anyone. She was so into being my friend, best friend, that she'd give up this entire group. I broke down in tears. I was happy. I was sad. It was a lot to take in. Sure enough, the troop would be disbanded after this. It would be a month, but eventually it no longer carried on. Her and I remained friends though, and I continued hanging out with her at her house. Another uncle came into the picture. That Christmas I spent at her house. Christmas night, her mother and the uncle let us, a couple of 13 to 14-year-old girls, take a full flute of champagne. I wasn't fond of it, but we felt so adult. The uncle kept making some rather inappropriate comments about my friend and I. Her mother became annoyed, they fought, he left. The next morning was hazy at best, but I remember finding my best friend in my sleeping bag with me. It didn't weird me out, we did that sometimes, crashed in each other's beds. The next week she called me any time I wasn't with her. Our friendship became much more creepy. The calls were every hour when I wasn't with her. She said a lot of, "I love yous," and "You are mine, my best friend, mine." I didn't think anything of it. Our sleepovers got weirder. I was waking up and always having my friend in my sleeping bag. If she wasn't there, she'd beg me the night before to lay with her in her bed. I just thought, her home life was as rough as mine, and that's what drew us together, right? Then, one day, she admitted she liked me, in a way that I like you. I was speechless, and because I felt I was way too young for a relationship or anything, that thought came with it. I bowed out. I told her I cared for her as a friend, and we could still be friends, but that I wasn't ready for that to change. She said she understood, and went a week without calling me. I thought I'd hurt her. I even thought about calling her to say I loved her too, if that's what it would take for us to be friends again. I didn't though. I was scared to. At the end of the week I got a call from her and she's acting like nothing happened. We started hanging out again, though she kept bringing up that she felt something for me. It got to the point where she was even attempting to try physically help me love her. Yeah, I ended up noping it out of that friendship. One day I just had enough and told her we couldn't be friends anymore. She seemed to handle it okay. I mean, she cried a bit, I cried a bit. I felt so heartbroken. I was in 8th grade and honestly didn't like where we were at. And since I'd be going to a new school, I thought a clean slate would help. Some things happened to my household family-wise, and I ended up being homeschooled instead. Weeks after school started, and I hadn't heard anything from her, I got a note in the mailbox. There were notes every day in my mailbox now. Love letters, angry letters, sad letters, all from my ex-best friend. Then her mother began leaving letters. Not for my mum, but for me. Both of them would leave letters in the box. The ex-friend always had them varied, but the mothers were pretty clear. I'd heard her daughter, and she wasn't happy. That's when the phone call started. As cliché as it sounds, the phone would be answered and all we'd hear is breathing, then they'd hang up. This persisted for 6 months. After 3 months, the letters stopped and it was just the phone calls. We had so much going on family-wise that this harassment was tame, so we never dealt with it, and after 6 months, it all stopped. We didn't hear from the girl nor her mother again. They still live in the same city. My mum still saw her mum around town and stuff, but they never spoke. Fast forward 2 to 3 years and I ran into my ex-best friend again. We were at the library and I was polite and she was polite. It was pretty chill and it sounded like her life was good. After that meeting though, the calls started again, and they carried on for about a month then stopped. I never heard from the girl again. I've since moved away and everything. The only reason this memory came up is because I was on the phone with my mother the other day. She said she saw the girl. She said she looked pretty rough. I felt bad for her, but not at the same time. It's only when I got older that I realized how serious and sinister things got with that, toxic friendship. So to my ex-best friend and her stalker mother, let's not meet again. Once upon a time I worked at Starbucks. While I've had many experiences that could certainly be deemed horrific, this is the one I'd like to share with you. When this happened, I was an assistant manager, so I often worked the front register. For a little context, I'm a religious person and wear a James Avery necklace across my neck. On this particular day, I was working the front when a customer I'd never seen came in. No biggie. We obviously saw all kind of folks. This guy was older, probably mid-60s or so, wearing a blue polo, shorts, and flip-flops. He looked normal. I'm a very customer service-oriented person, so I'd always chat up my customers, and this was no different. As he's about to walk away, he points to my necklace and says, "What's that? Some kind of pagan symbol?" "Oh, it's a filigree cross, and it has my life verse on the back." He nods understandingly and in approval and goes, "Now, you know there's only one version of the Bible that's worth a damn, right? Which one is it?" I know what he's getting at, although I'm annoyed at him being crass, so I say, "I guess you're referring to the King James version." He nods in approval, reaches out to shake my hand, and I have no problem shaking hands or anything like that. So I shake his hand and he pats it into a nice to meet you kind of way. And before I know what's happening, he raises my hand to his mouth. I thought he was going to kiss it, which would be customary for his age. No. He makes eye contact with me and proceeds to full-on lick my hand. I am so stunned and disgusted I don't even know what to say, and after what feels like an eternity, he drops my hand and saunters off to get his coffee. I let my partners know via the headset what happened, and that I was going to be in the back for a while, washing my hand and vomiting. We were all dumbfounded and couldn't believe what happened. You know what's funny? Usually when I told this story, at least one person would ask, "Did you have caramel on your hand and something?" Like that would make it acceptable. Anyway, Mr. Licky, let's never meet.
When I was 5 to 6 years old, I lived in a regular 3-bedroom house and shared a room with my brother. My bed was set up so that if I woke up and picked up my head, I would be looking directly at the doorframe. This particular house made it so that I could see into my parents' room. I woke up one night and there was a see-through green man in the doorway. He was looking directly at me, and it wasn't like a light playing on my eyes. I could look to the left or right, and the image wouldn't follow. Whatever it was stationary in my doorway. The man must have been about 6 feet and muscular. He also seemed to have the transparency of the Predator, only I hadn't seen the movie yet. However, when I finally did see it, I thought that's who was watching me, but that's a different story. I screamed for my dad and told him there was a man right there pointing to the doorway. He freaked out, of course, and couldn't see it. He ran around the house checking all the locks, leaving me with the man in the doorway. No one could see it, so my dad told me to go back to sleep. It's kind of hard when he was staring at me from the doorway, not making a move, but I put my covers over my head and fell back asleep. Fast forward 3 years later to another house. My room was set up in the exact same way, and I woke up with the door open again, and standing in the doorway was the exact same man, watching me from the doorframe for however long. Only this time I wasn't afraid. This time I remembered thinking, "Oh, it's you again." I went back to sleep and haven't seen him again. I make it a point to never arrange my room where my bed faces the doorframe if I were to wake up, and always make sure to keep the door firmly closed. I used to work a graveyard shift, and before I would get ready for work, I would take a quick hour or two nap. On this particular day, I had a tough time falling asleep, but once I did, I was immediately transported into a dream. During this whole dream, imagine me going through the whole thing with a feeling of utter and complete dread, just a feeling of knowing that I was not supposed to be doing this, or see this place at all. For context, I'm a girl who was 19 at the time, but in the dream I was a boy of around the age of 10, and I was with 4 other boys. One was younger, and my brother, who was about 6, and 3 others were my friends around my age. It was late summer, and about 6 at night. It was just starting to get dark out, and we were walking through this forested area, one that seemed to be right outside a new housing development. I remember hearing a train nearby, and 2 of the older boys who were leading the way were talking about a tunnel that they had found the day before. My little brother and I asked questions while the 3rd boy remained quiet, while we followed the elder 2. We then came to what I can only describe as a concrete slab, with what looked like a sewage drain in the center.
but there was no smell of sewage, and the surrounding area was cleared out, trees and bushes cut down and removed. We climbed down into the tunnel, and were brought into a concrete room with a large drain about 3 feet in diameter, in the center of the floor, and a clean metal grate covering it. It was too dark to see if there was anything in there, but I got the feeling that it had to be water. 2 of the walls parallel to one another were blank, while the other 2 had tunnels in them, again about 3 feet in diameter. It was around the same height and size off the ground, and the walls were perfect angles and had no signs of aging, and the grates and floor, save for a few pine needles, were kicked in while climbing down, and spotless. One of the tunnels on the wall had a grate on it, while the other was open. The 2 older boys climbed up and began examining something with a flashlight. It was a rock or gem of some sort. One of them told me to light the lantern we had bought, and I lit it, and handed it to the quiet friend while I helped my brother climb into the open space. Suddenly we heard a humming, like machinery starting up coming from the open tunnel. The 2 boys got excited and started to head down the tunnel. My little brother followed, and I tried to get them to slow down. I glanced at my friend, and he shrugged, handed me the lantern, and hopped up into the tunnel after them. I looked up out of the drain one last time with the feeling of knowing that I would never see the sky again. My knowledge was confirmed when the lid to the drain above me slammed down, next to the loud clang of heavy metal on metal, when I heard the horrified screams of my friends. Then I wake up sobbing. I still for the life of me cannot figure out who the hell I was or where I was. I don't know any names of the people I was with or what happened to us after I woke, but I remember every other detail. Every once in a while, I will try to do some Google searches to see if I can find anything about 5 boys going missing in a forest, and nothing ever comes up. The dream was so vivid, so real, that I can't help but feel that maybe I was somehow projecting into some little boy's mind and got to watch as he and his friends found something they shouldn't and perished because of it. It creeps me out to this day, and you can't imagine just how it itches in my mind. Any thoughts and ideas would be tremendously appreciated. This super happy fun experience took place 5 years ago, after a whole other incident with a neighbor stalking me. But this isn't about that. I had just started working a new job after Christmas. The company I worked for took over an account of a building closer to my home, so I transferred to the newly acquired location. After my first week there, some of the people began to ask me about my relationship status and began to take an interest in me. This little ray of sunshine happened to be single back then, but I was not ready to mingle. I was focused on work, my family, and school. I was only there for about 3 months and didn't end up liking the new location, so I left for a better suited job. Imagine my shock when some of the workers wished me an early happy birthday and luck at my new job. In a completely clownish move, the manager had disclosed where I would be working, which I thought was a bit crappy. As I'm leaving, I'd seen something that I'd never noticed before. A phone list of employees with first and last names printed in the break room. Of the many what the actual hell moments to come, that was the first. I let the manager know he needed to remove me from it, as I no longer worked there, and 2, would not be okay with it, even if I were to continue as an employee. He shrugged it off with the attitude of someone who assumes an upset woman is having her time in the month, rolled his eyes, and begrudgingly removed the piece of paper. I was thrilled to start my new job when the call started. Looking back, there had been maybe 3 months prior to what I believed was the beginning of this, but they weren't as persistent, so I didn't link them together. I just want to say that I have a tendency to bleach every red flag white. Please trust your instincts, and scary movie, run away when red flags are presented. So, I began to receive phone calls from a blocked number every week, only Fridays to Sundays, up with holidays, and always between 1 to 4 a.m. I have a weird thing about having my phone near me, and often at night ever since my sister's accident. When she had said accident and they tried to call me about her, my phone was often in the other room. For everyone who wants to ask why I didn't just shut it off or put it away, this is why. I'm an insomniac and a night sleeper, so the calls always woke me up. I tried answering them without saying more than hello, but always just heard breathing. This had gone on for 3 weeks when my birthday came. I worked my new job, then the rebel that I am went and got a red box to take and have pizza and movie night with my parents to celebrate. So I'm scrolling through the ridiculously dull selection of red box tiles on my phone ring, when one of the girls from my new job tells me that a guy who identified himself as my boyfriend had come and dropped off pizza, flowers, and a card for my birthday. Confused, I said I didn't have a boyfriend, and she nervously laughs and said that she found it very strange my boyfriend wouldn't know it was my day off work, and that he would need to leave the stuff there rather than give it to me in person. I thanked her, got my movie, and didn't give it too much thought. It was my birthday, so that was a problem for me tomorrow. The next day I opened the card at work, and it's tickets, photocopied. Not the actual ones I could have used to a place 4 hours away. In the card there was a lengthy poem and details on the trip, complete with dates, hotel name, and the person planned to take us on. Creep factor raised. I had no idea who this was from, and when I asked the co-worker, they could only give me a generic description. The weekend comes, and like clockwork, the calls come in. I decide not to answer and just decline the call. Life goes on. My mystery night and potential restraining order never came back to my work, and the calls continue. These calls went on for 3 years. I'll save you the unnecessary details, but I've changed jobs and moved in those years. The calls did not stop until the winter of last year. I tried answering and asking who it was. I tried screaming and cussing them out. I'd even tried having my friend answer. I tried having males answer and threaten. Basically, I tried more than Sam I Am tried to get you to eat green eggs and ham. A few times they would have a song queued up to play when I answered. The more it went on, the more emboldened they got. Then they started heavy breathing, and then whispering my name. At one point they ended up graphically describing what they dreamed of doing to me. I called the cops, who said without an actual threat they couldn't do anything. Dreams don't count as threats, is what I was told. I called the phone company to see if they could tell me the number of the caller, who told me they couldn't disclose that and to call the cops. I ended the phone call with a cheery, "When you see someone wearing my skin as a suit on the news, remember this. Have a great day." I am now debating on changing my phone number. There are personal legit reasons why I didn't do this before, but also seriously concerned with who the hell this is. For someone to be committed to calling you every weekend for the rest of that long is extremely frightening. One morning, after another 2 unknown missed calls, I wake up from a text from an unknown number, and I'm greeted with an unsolicited dick pic. Fun fact, no one wants an unsolicited dick pic. I responded stating if whoever it was ever contacted me again, their photo and phone number would be placed on Craigslist Men Seeking so that they could get their own share of dick pics. I reverse searched the number, and lo and behold, I got a name of someone who I briefly worked with at the beginning of this story. And then it all started to click. That the call started once I began that job. This guy would have known where my new job was, and about my birthday, since the co-workers I had working there wished me an early happy birthday on my last day. Sending him that pic solidified that he was the caller. That's all, folks. Anticlimactic ending, never saw or heard from him again, thankfully. So, to the weird obsessive guy, I guess we probably won't meet ever again. When I was in the 7th grade, I wasn't stupid. I knew when someone was watching me, and I sure wasn't ugly. I was in shape from playing soccer and going to the gym to stay in shape. I wish I loved myself a bit more back then, but that's besides the point. I was very obviously underage because my face looked 10 and I wore a backpack. Plus, my school was directly next to the Starbucks where this creep worked. Since I was in a bad place back then, I kept several journal entries about my encounter with this man that can help me piece together some details and timelines of the event. But for now, let's begin. I was 12,
and soon to be 13 in about 4 months. I was brand new to the area, and unlike my old school, my new school wouldn't let students in early. This was awful because school started at 8:40, and my mum would drop me off on her way to work at 7:10. It was Texas, and very humid and hot most days, or pouring down with rain, and to avoid sitting outside in the awful weather, I'd have my mum drop me off at the Starbucks directly next to my school. So many middle schoolers would be there, and even some elementary schoolers, because the elementary school was connected to my middle school by a gate. So if you saw a young girl with a backpack, it was extremely obvious the girl wasn't legal. I've always been a very awkward person in new environments, so the first day my mum dropped me off at Starbucks, I was so embarrassed about filling up a seat inside that a paying customer could use, and I ended up sitting outside in the sweltering heat for an hour. I regret my decision so much to this day, because the creep had seen me out there all by myself and realized I was an easy target. He came outside and started talking to me and complimenting my long hair and beautiful face. When he asked for my name, I told him that I wasn't comfortable giving it out. After that, he made it his mission to find out my name. In the days following, I grew comfortable enough to go inside and find myself a seat. The first journal entry I wrote goes that the new school is too new and too weird. Since I first sat at Starbucks before school, the worker won't leave me alone, and that he'd been making me free drinks and randomly talking to me. I felt guilty and sick, like he was hitting on me in a way. Today he sang about me to the tune of his stupid music. When this place was busy, I snuck out. Alright, so I remember this. I walked inside the cafe and he was mopping/sweeping up a mess, and he was obviously in control of the audio because some songs I had never heard started playing. He saw me enter and began to sing, badly, about what I was wearing at the time and describing my long hair like I was Rapunzel. He had already made my usual drink and handed it to me as a few strangers watched. He knew my schedule like clockwork. Normally I sat in the corner seat that faced the register, but today I sat with my back to it so that he couldn't see my face, explaining what I meant by feeling guilty. I didn't like to accept free things from anyone, and I grew up being called spoiled by my older sister, so I grew used to telling everyone no when they offered things to me because my sister would get jealous. This is the next entry I have about him. Today was terrible. I got dropped off earlier than usual, and I was begging the worker wasn't there. But he was. He kept calling me my name, which I never told him, and he pronounces it as Jacotta. He was giving me a drink to give to my teacher, which I hate, and he also told him by name in the first place. The reason he was giving him the drink was because he told him my name. I gave him the drink back and left. So the day before, I was sitting in Starbucks, and my social studies teacher walked in wearing his lanyard and ID. This creep had been asking other teachers before about my identity, but none of them taught me and didn't know it. Well, obviously my social studies teacher would, since he taught me. And after the worker made my teacher's drink, he pointed at me and asked my name. Dakota, he said, and then left. The next day I grabbed my drink and waited the hour for class to start. As I'm leaving, the creep calls out my name, which he misheard, and I go to the counter to see what he wants. He pushes a big, hot drink towards me, and I remember being very confused about why he made me 2 drinks since I already had 1. Anyway, I liked them cold, not hot, since it was still summer. When I asked him what it was for, he told me it was to give to my teacher since he was kind enough to give my name away. I was frazzled. I gave him the drink back and left. I am glad I had written it down in my journal because my brain created a fake memory of walking down the hallway and giving my teacher the drink, which was obviously not the case. The next entry goes something like this. We all have that person we'll do anything for. Hannah. We all have that person who makes us question our sanity. My friends. We all have that person we'd never admit to ourselves we're scared of. The Starbucks worker. A few weeks later, the next entry of him goes something like this. I saw the creepy worker after school. He was outside the Starbucks talking to two sitting smoking ladies, standing over them and smiling. The girls had kids, and I was near the window and I couldn't stop looking at him. I didn't want him to see me. He's creepy, and I kept my hood up. This was the last of my entries, but the year I was in 8th, I still saw him frequently in passing. I knew he didn't work Wednesdays, so I would only enter Starbucks if it was Wednesday. Some other things to note. He treated me special and no one else. Once again, he knew I was a minor, and he'd frequently tell me I was beautiful. He once asked me if I wanted to know his name, but he wasn't wearing a name tag, and I wasn't about to say yes, because it would have given him the wrong message. Maybe he'd have thought I was attracted to him. I wanted to know it, because I wanted to warn others of him. He gave me so many free drinks, I knew damn well he was paying for them out of pocket, and he spent at least $100 on me to give me those drinks. Nonetheless, creepy guy who obsesses over a young girl, obviously underage, let's not meet again.
This didn't happen in my house, but it is by far the creepiest and most surreal thing I've ever seen. I know what I saw, as I saw it with my own 2 eyes, and no one would ever be able to convince me otherwise. I was driving home about 10 years ago, going south on Beverly Glen, just past Mulholland for anyone that knows LA. For anyone that doesn't, it's a windy road with some houses to the right, a chain-link fence to the left with a hill, cliffs not far past it. It must have been around 11:30. No cars save my own on this particular stretch, and about as dark as it can get in LA. With all the city lights, there are no street lights on this part of Beverly Glen. I was going about 30 miles an hour, and I see what appears to be a person about to cross the street from right to left at the furthest point of my lights. More like the movement caught my eye. I assumed it was a person and I slowed down to avoid potentially running over a pedestrian. I was going about 15 at this point when the person starts into the road. I'm going to do my best to describe what I saw. From right to left, directly in front of my car, maybe 10 feet, comes this pitch-black, semi-human shaped shadow. It was three-dimensional and moved as if it were walking, but very quickly and fluidly. My lights had no reflection on it. It was almost as if it bent around it. In what I'm guessing was 5 seconds, though it seemed like 10 minutes, it had crossed the 2-lane street and reached the chain-link fence. At this point, it went directly through the chain-link fence and disappeared into the darkness. Only then did I realize my palms were sweating, my heart racing, and that I was going about 2 miles an hour with my mouth wide open. After I'd gotten home, I called and told about 5 people and entered what I seen into Google. And what came up were shadow people. This is 100% true. It was very bizarre, and as a man of science, I tried to think it was an illusion of some kind, that my mind was playing tricks on me. However, there was something about it that made me feel so shaken and hard to explain. Before I moved to the States, I was about 12, and I was having a sleepover with one of my friends. At the time it happened, my parents were getting us something to eat, and my brother was over at his friend's house. We were in the living room talking about close to being dark. When we felt like we were floating, but we weren't. But it felt like we were. Then all of a sudden we heard figures brushing on the window blinds. The windows, where it happened, were across from us, and we actually saw the blinds move a little bit. We went into my room and waited for my parents, but it didn't stop. That night my friend woke up all of a sudden, and she said she felt like someone was staring at her. She said that she saw this tall dark figure by my door, which was closed but it was now open. She also saw a smaller dark figure standing by me that was staring at my TV. When she told me this next morning, I didn't want to believe it,
and told her it could have just been a dream, but she gave me a look which was pure fear, and that's rare of her, since she doesn't get scared often. I have to admit that it put me on edge, and that I was afraid of being in my own room at night, but when nothing else happened I just brushed it off. I still wonder if she really saw something, or if it was just, sleep paralysis. I want to start this off by saying that I haven't shared this story with anyone, mainly due to fear, because the guy in question is the son of one of my dad's friends, and I just know for a fact that my father will inevitably end up blaming all of this on me. I am currently a senior in high school and live in a pretty nice town in Northern Carolina. It all started a year ago when I was 16. At the time, I was working at Starbucks as a barista. It was Thursday, and surprisingly the cafe was almost empty. A few minutes before the end of my shift, one of my colleagues informed me that a cute guy is here to see you. I was somewhat confused. I didn't have a boyfriend at the time and I'm pretty average, so I couldn't imagine that a guy would be interested in me. As I turned around, I recognized the boy instantly. It was Skip, my dad's best friend's son. He's 3 years older than me, and for a reason that I wasn't aware of, he enjoyed making me feel miserable, calling me fat and ugly, and all other sweet things that you really want to hear as an already insecure teenager. So for obvious reasons, seeing him at my workplace did not fill me with joy. Now, on a completely objective point of view, he was a very good-looking boy. Blonde hair, blue eyes, but he knew that he was attractive, which made me want to punch his smirk off his handsome face. Skips was there to apologize for being a complete douchebag, and confessed that he actually really liked me, but didn't know how to act around me because I radiated such a powerful energy, almost like it was destabilizing. Weird timing, but okay. Being the dumb girl that I was, I accepted his apologies, and from that moment on we kept in touch every day. He would send me a good morning and a good night text, give me cute nicknames and whatever couples do. However, he never asked me to be his girlfriend, but would introduce himself to others as my one and true love. I should have seen the red flags from the start. He would show up at my place without asking me at least once a week. I live alone with my dad, who's actually really like the boy, so my old man didn't really care about his constant presence at home. After a few months into our relationship, I decided to call it off. He was being really possessive. He was jealous of my girlfriends, and I discovered that he was in contact with his previous girlfriend and kept on telling me not to worry about it. Yeah, did that ever work for anyone? Didn't think so. His reaction wasn't what I expected. He shrugged and was like, okay, whatever you want, bae. Don't get me wrong, I didn't want him to hurt because of me, but he seemed no nonchalant about this. It was almost worrying. I thought this story would end there, but oh boy was I wrong. Even after the breakup, he kept on coming over and taking naps on my bed while I wasn't home. When I confronted him about it, he would respond with, I came to see your dad, or, we're still friends. I don't see what's bothering you. Well, honey, what's bothering me is that if you weren't wearing an expensive-ass cologne with a strong-ass smell, I wouldn't have known you came to my room to begin with. I tried to tell my dad that Skips and I were no longer together, and that he had no right to come over and make himself at home in my own room. He laughed and said I was being a drama queen, so I guess you understand why I'm kind of stuck at this point. What I didn't know was that Skips was basically following me everywhere. I noticed it a few weeks ago, but I'm pretty sure that it had been going on for quite some time now. He would follow my car as I was going to school, park his truck in the Starbucks parking lot whenever I was working, and would peek through the bedroom window and leave handprints that I only saw after some time. How did this dumb chick not notice it before? Well, as any horror movie fan and true crime podcast enthusiast, it's not unusual to feel observed or spied on. At least I think. Plus his truck was pretty common, so I couldn't tell if it was him or not,
until a few weeks ago my car had a problem with one of the tires, so I had to take the bus for a little while. One morning as I got to my house, I saw his truck and immediately made out his face as he was sitting in the driver's seat. That's when I connected the dots. My gut feeling was going into frenzy whenever I was out. 3 of my tires being slashed, the handprints on my bedroom window. When the realization hit me, a shiver ran down my spine. I felt paralyzed and a tear welled up in my eyes. I felt nauseous and decided that I needed to talk to someone about it, because I've read enough stories about it, and trust me when I tell you that crazy ex-boyfriend plus helpless girl never go well together. I made my mind up and told my friend Tyler, who's 5 years older than me and is studying law. After I shared the whole story, he told me that unfortunately there wasn't anything I could do because I didn't have any concrete evidence, and it would be my word against Skip's, and he's a damn good manipulator. Now I'm stuck because I don't know what to do. I tried to take pictures of his car, but due to the lack of light in my neighborhood, I never managed to snap one in which he would be recognizable. Whenever he's parked in front of the house and we make eye contact, he usually just starts the truck and drives off. I haven't seen him in 3 days, but my gut feeling is still making me go crazy. Who knows when Skips will show up again? I just received my library science degree. I was pretty excited to get a job as a librarian and went on my way to a job interview as a newly minted LIS graduate. So I apply and got a job at a public library an hour away, and hear back from a man who tells me he'd like to talk about a job. I feel good about this, and he says he'd like to meet me down the street from the library. That's odd, but maybe it's a very casual library. So I decide to find the address, and it ends up being a coffee shop. I get out of my car and walk into the coffee shop where I see an older man in a nice coat sitting on the couch. He seems pretty laid back. Now I'm starting to think this is odd. If I were a young female, I'd hightail it out of there. However, I'm a late 20s male and decide to go and talk to the guy waving me over. Looking back, even being who I was, maybe I shouldn't have. He asks if I'm Alec, and I tell him yes. So I sit down and he sits on literally the couch across from me, and I give him my usual speech about what I can offer him for the library. He says that sounds interesting, same old, and all the job interviews are fairly polite. However, this is odd, and I can feel it. It seems more like a date than an interview. He then tells me about the job, which sounds very made up, writing press releases for the library. And after that, he says he'll email me about the job, but not before telling me that he should write a book suggestion from me. Well, he likes mysteries, and I tell him I like Devonport novels by John Sandford, and he gives me a creepy smile and says that sounds great. When I get home, as I was living with my parents at the time, as the job search went on, my dad pokes holes in the job he gave me. He says why couldn't they just get someone already on staff to write a press release? My dad is right. The whole thing sounded fishy. Well, I never got that email, nor heard or even saw the man around again, nor do I have any proof from the library website he's even associated with them. I would say let's not meet, but I'm not even sure what exactly this whole thing was in the first place.
The events that happened occurred around the 30th of November to 1st of December 2017. The 30th of November is a special day for Romanians. It's the night of Saint Andrei, a night in which our folklore is supposed to be a night where monsters, werewolves, witches, and strigoi roam free. That night I had nightmares of shadow figures and monsters, and woke up sweaty but shrugged them off. I went out in town for December 1st. It was a national holiday, and hung out with some boys after some fun in the town, where they showed me a video of them exploring an abandoned block and claiming there were ghosts there. And I said it was fake, because there was a voice calling out for her mum, which I'd heard many times in previous spooky videos. They went out at night in peak darkness,
but we went in broad daylight with no fear. I was losing faith in God at that time and was more skeptical, and the stairs had no rail, which was, by far, the only frightening thing for me at the time. We went in every single apartment of the first floor and said there was nothing, with confidence. But on the second or third floor, as I was starting to go up, I saw, of the left of me, a shadowy figure peeking over the door looking at me, despite having no facial features, and it quickly went back into the apartment. I peeked over, and there was nothing but rubble. It was very close, with slim fingers, claw-like, and after checking every floor and making sure it wasn't one of my friend's pranks, I said, "See, there are no ghosts." That night and after, I had the same nightmare of Saint Andre, and then things went back to normal. I slowly regained faith in God about a year ago, but recently remembered this. I know there's a phenomenon where, if in the darkness, you're scared enough, your mind will play tricks on you, seeing what you expect to see. But I was dashing with confidence that there were no ghosts, and it was broad daylight. I was afraid that I would fall down the stairs because there was no rail, and I seriously can't explain that shadowy figure that I saw. I work for a place that sometimes asks me to fly down to Laredo, Texas for some work assignments. I love to travel, so I always agree to go. The company always books me a room at La Posada Hotel, a very old and famous hotel. I've stayed here countless times and I've never had any issue or problems, and for the most part my stays at this hotel are always uneventful. However, one night I experienced something that I will never forget, and I sometimes think about every now and then. It was after a long day at work. I got back to my hotel room and quickly fell asleep. Nothing strange, but in the middle of the night I started to have a very disturbing dream. In this dream I was standing in a room, and someone's arms were wrapped around my chest area. I didn't know whose arms were wrapped around me at first, nor did I really care, but what got my attention quickly was that this individual was starting to essentially dry hump me from behind. This is one of the reasons I've never told anyone this. When the individual started to essentially assault me from behind, I immediately turned around to see who was there and yell at them to stop. To my dismay, the person I saw in my dream was my younger brother. I'm a guy, by the way, and was obviously shocked and sickened to see this, so I immediately woke up. When I did, I would find myself lying on my stomach in bed, with my face looking towards the nightstand. The first thing I saw was the alarm clock, 3:08 a.m. I then noticed that I was in a state of sleep paralysis. I couldn't move my body at all, and I could move my eyes. The best way to describe this state of sleep paralysis was that it felt like there was a heavy blanket of gravity keeping me down and motionless. All I could see were the bright red numbers of the alarm clock as the room was pitch dark. Then I realized something chilling. The humping sensation I had originally felt in my dream, and what was the cause of me to wake up, did not stop. It was an aggressive feeling, and I just felt my backside being pushed down. I don't know why, but to be honest, I wasn't as scared as much as I was confused. It was like my mind was still trying to process everything going on. I had just woken up from a dream where my younger brother was assaulting me, and after waking up I found myself in sleep paralysis with the humping sensation persisting. All I remember doing was closing my eyes, opening them again, and hoping it was still possible I was dreaming. But it wouldn't stop. It felt like something was on top of me, preventing me from moving, and that this thing was assaulting me as well. I remember that I then put all of my focus on my hand. All I wanted to do was move it. I felt that if I could move my hand, I would slap out of it. While opening and closing my eyes, I would focus on my hand and do everything possible to move it. And after what felt like an eternity, I was finally able to gain control and move. I opened my eyes and saw that only about a minute had passed on the alarm clock. I sat up on the bed and turned on the lamp on the nightstand. That is when the fear of what had just happened to me hit me. I thought to myself, what the hell was that? I don't remember going back to sleep that night. I stayed in that same room for the rest of the trip, and have since made multiple trips to the same hotel, and nothing eventful has happened since. I didn't tell anyone what happened due to the fact I barely believed myself.
and it was a bit embarrassing, to be honest. I'm someone who tries to look for the logical explanation of things. The logical side of me tells me that it was just a big dream all in my head. However, there is something else that tells me it wasn't. I know what I felt. It felt like something was assaulting me that night. I don't necessarily believe in spirits or entities, but it's an experience like this that causes me to pause and just think a little. I hope you understand why the story is both embarrassing and scary. If I can go out on a limb here and entertain the idea that spirits and entities are real, then could it be that I was essentially assaulted by one of them? What gets me, though, was that it first started in a dream. I don't understand how it could have been incorporated into it. I feel like that is what happened to me, except it wasn't a sound but a feeling. Could it truly be that I was assaulted by something in the middle of the night, and that it manifested in my dream? I know you won't have the answers, but I would love to hear your listeners' thoughts on this bizarre event.
I'm an 18-year-old female from the UK. This happened in February of 2019. I was 16 at the time, and I got set up on a semi-blind date. We had seen photos of each other by a mutual friend. The guy was called Cameron, who was 19. Cameron seemed like your average guy, maybe a little into video games and anime and stuff, but overall, nothing my friends told me about him seemed off in any way. Our mutual friend gave us each other's numbers, and we texted for a night, and decided to meet in a Starbucks the next day since we were both free. I never liked to meet new people this soon, but figured since Cameron knew my friend, it couldn't possibly go wrong. How mistaken I was. I arrived slightly early, ordered my coffee since I never liked guys to feel like they have to buy it for me, and parked up a seat facing away from the door, and pulled out a book. I'm there for maybe 15 minutes chilling out when I get a text saying he's here. So I'm like, great, I'm at this table, and I feel a presence over my shoulder, and I turn my head, slightly in acknowledgement. He must be here. Before I even get the chance to squeak a hello, his lips latch onto my neck, and he starts sucking on it. Now, I don't like people touching my neck at the best of times. I'm very ticklish, and I get super uncomfortable by people even touching it. A few times, I've had massages or hair treatments, and I've been holding it in discomfort, and he's latched on like a leech. This man also smelled horrendous, kind of like dust personified. I freak out and elbow his chest to get him the hell off me. He lets go and looks at me with this weird expression on his face, and laughs in deadpan. It's really, really creepy, and I start to become alarmed, and ask him what the hell that was about, and he just said he thought it was cute. I try to have a conversation. I'm like, okay, first impressions don't mean anything. Let's try and give him a chance. He's just creepily staring at my chest. Wow, I didn't know Asians could have boobs like that. I better not let you go. That's a direct quote. You can't make this crap up. I'm distinctly uncomfortable, but I don't want to just run away. He's giving me really weird vibes, so I go into the ladies' bathroom and wait for someone else to come in. I ask her to help me get out undetected. I don't want this man following me home or something like that. She of course agrees and lends me her hat and scarf. It's February in the UK after all, and we come out the bathroom together and she manages to help me sneak out the back door of the Starbucks without him noticing me. He asked my friend where I went, but I told my friend to never mention me again. I was too terrified. I know I probably didn't behave well, I should have just told him I was leaving, but I was honestly so scared. To the guy who decided it was appropriate to suck my neck, before we had even said hello, let's not meet again.